Damien Rourke didn't scream when he was angry. That was the thing people never understood about him, the ones who'd never been in the same room when his mood shifted. He went quiet, his jaw set. His eyes moved to you the way a camera lens adjusts its focus, slow and precise until you were the only thing in the frame. And then he spoke in that low, measured voice that never once cracked, and somehow that was worse than any shouting could ever be. Elena had learned to read the silence. 10 years of marriage had taught her the difference between the quiet that meant he was distracted, and the quiet meant that someone was going to disappear by morning. Tonight, standing in the doorway of his private study, with rain hammering the windows of the Blackwood estate, she finally understood she had spent a decade learning the wrong lesson. She had been studying how to survive him. She should have been studying how to leave. The ledger was still open on his desk. 47 pages of names, dates, amounts, and secrets, and on page 31, in Damien's own tight handwriting, was hers. If you've ever loved someone who made you feel like the walls were closing in, even on the good days, stay with me. Subscribe to this channel, hit like, and drop your city or country in the comments below. I want to know how far this story has traveled. Now let's go back to the night Elena Voss stopped being someone's secret. She hadn't meant to find it. That was the part that would stay with her longest, not the betrayal itself, but succedent of it. The mundane, stupid accident. She'd gone into Damien's study to find a phone charger. His desk drawer was the one place in the entire estate she'd never opened, not because he'd forbidden it, but because she'd trained herself over the years not to look too closely at the things he kept locked away. That restraint she used to think was love, the kind that trusted without needing proof. The drawer wasn't locked that night. He'd been in a rush earlier, a call from Marcus, his head lieutenant, something about a shipment going sideways at the East Port, and Damien had yanked the drawer open, grabbed whatever he needed, and left without pushing it fully shut. Elena stood in the doorway for 30 seconds, looking at the 2-inch gap between the drawer and the frame. Then she crossed the room, told herself she was just looking for the charger, and pulled it open. The charger was there. The ledger was under it. She almost didn't pick it up. Almost. It was a plain thing black cover, no label, the kind you could buy at any office supply store. The spine was worn in a way that told her it had been handled constantly, opened and closed hundreds of times. She pulled it out, sat down in Damien's chair, and began to read. By the time she reached page 12, her hands had stopped shaking. Not because she'd calmed down, but because her body had moved past the stage of shaking into something colder and more still. The ledger was Damien's insurance policy. That was the only way to understand it. Every person in his organization, every lieutenant, every associate, every low-level runner who'd ever done a job for the Rourke family had an entry. The entries weren't just financial records. They were secrets. Affairs, debts, crimes that could put people away for life, photographs described in plain clinical language, testimonies that had been suppressed, evidence that had been buried. Damien hadn't just built an empire on fear. He had built it on knowing exactly what every person around him stood to lose. That wasn't what made Elena's chest stop working. Page 31 did that. Her name was at the top of the entry in the same handwriting as all the others. Elena Voss Rourke. Below it, dated from 3 years before their marriage, was a paragraph that rearranged everything she thought she'd known about her own life. She read it 4 times. The rain kept hitting the windows. Somewhere in the house, a clock was ticking. Then she stood up, walked to the bathroom off the study, and vomited. She'd met Damien at 24, at an event she'd attended with her brother Nolan. She'd known at a general level that Damien Rourke wasn't someone you found at ordinary dinner parties. You didn't ask too many questions about where his money came from or why city councilmen cleared their schedules when he called. But he'd been different with her from the beginning, or she'd believed he was. Patient, careful, funny in the dry, self-aware way that surprised her because she hadn't expected it. Her father had died when she was 19, leaving the family in a financial chaos that took years to fully understand. Her mother had retreated into a kind of permanent fragility that put the weight of everything on Elena's shoulders. And Nolan, charming, reckless, impossible to hate, Nolan had a gift for making problems disappear by creating bigger ones somewhere else. Damien had stepped into all of that like he'd been custom built for it. Stabilized things, quietly, without ever making her feel indebted. She'd thought at the time that it was love. She'd thought she was lucky. Page 31 told her something different. 3 years before she'd met Damien, at that dinner party, Nolan had come to him. Not the other way around. Nolan had borrowed money from a man connected to the Rourke organization, a significant amount, the kind of amount that could ruin a family, and when he'd defaulted, the man had come to collect in ways that went beyond financial pressure. Damien had intervened, had settled the debt himself, had made the problem go away. In exchange, according to the ledger, Nolan had agreed to bring his sister to a specific event at a specific date and to ensure that Damien Rourke had an opportunity to meet her properly. The rest of it, the courtship, the falling in love, the wedding, the decade of marriage had all grown from a transaction Elena had never been told about. Nolan had sold her introduction like a commodity, and Damien had accepted the terms. She sat back down on the bathroom floor, her back against the cold tile wall, and pressed her palms flat against the floor because she needed to feel something solid. Here was the thing she kept circling back to. The thing she couldn't get past. Damien had kept the record. He'd written it down in the same ledger where he kept everyone else's leverage. Which meant that somewhere in Damien's architecture of control, the story of how he'd arranged to meet his wife was under the same category as affairs and buried crimes and evidence that could destroy lives. It was insurance. Even their origin story was insurance. She didn't know how long she sat there. At some point, the clock in the study chimed the hour. At some point, she heard the front gate buzz, which meant Damien's car had arrived. She heard his footsteps in the marble entry hall, heard Marcus's voice, lower and faster than usual. They were arguing about something. Elena stood up, looked at herself in the bathroom mirror, hollow-eyed, pale, a small smear of mascara under her left eye, and made a decision. She put the ledger back in the drawer. She pushed the drawer closed. She turned off the bathroom light and walked back up the stairs to the bedroom she shared with her husband, and she lay down on her side of the bed in the dark and waited. Not because she'd decided to stay, because she needed time to think, and running without a plan was how people got caught. Damien came to bed around 2 a.m. She heard him undress in the dark, felt the mattress shift when he lay down beside her. He was close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating off him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "You're awake," he said. Not a question. "Couldn't sleep," she said. Her voice came out steady. She'd always been better at hiding than she'd given herself credit for. He made a low sound, the one that meant he'd accepted the answer without fully believing it. His hand found her shoulder in the dark, not possessively, just contact, the way married people touched each other after years of shared space. She didn't pull away. She lay there and let him touch her shoulder and thought about page 31, and the word arranged written in his handwriting. "Marcus is losing his nerve," Damien said after a moment. He was the kind of man who talked about business in bed the same way he talked about it everywhere else, because for him there was no wall between the two. He's been talking to people he shouldn't be talking to. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "Handle it." "Right." She waited the usual way. There was a pause. The efficient way. She nodded at the ceiling in the dark. Efficient. That was the word he used when he meant something she wasn't supposed to ask follow-up questions about. She'd learned to let those words hang in the air without pulling on them. Another lesson from the curriculum of being Damien Rourke's wife. "Go to sleep," he said. His hand moved from her shoulder. He turned onto his back. Within 15 minutes, his breathing had slowed and deepened into sleep. Elena lay still for another hour. Then she began to plan. She had $12,000 in cash, her own money, not his, built up slowly from the household account over 3 years, in amounts small enough that they'd never triggered questions. Not because she'd ever concretely planned to leave. More because some part of her, the part that had grown up watching her mother, depend on a man for everything, and then fall apart without him, had always insisted on having an exit that belonged only to her. She also had a phone that Damien didn't know about, a prepaid she'd bought at a drugstore in a neighborhood she had no reason to visit, paid for in cash, registered to a name that wasn't hers. She'd told herself at the time that it was paranoia. Looking at Damien's sleeping face in the thin light coming through the curtains, she understood it had been instinct. The baby made everything harder. She was 11 weeks along, far enough to know, not far enough to show. She hadn't told Damien yet. She'd been waiting for what she'd called the right moment, And now the right moment had been replaced by something that had no right moment attached to it at all. She pressed one hand flat against her stomach in the dark and made a second decision, one she didn't let herself second guess. The baby was the reason she was leaving, not the reason she was staying. A child deserved to know the truth of things. A child deserved a mother who hadn't been purchased. She spent the next 3 days constructing a version of normal that was indistinguishable from any other week. She cooked the meals she usually cooked. She attended the dinner Damien had planned with 2 of his senior associates and their wives, and she laughed at the right moments and asked the right questions and drank water. She'd convinced the waitstaff was sparkling wine. She let Damien kiss her goodbye in the mornings and hello in the evenings. She also spent those 3 days memorizing the ledger. She couldn't take the original Damien would notice immediately. But each time he left the study, she slipped in for 10 or 15 minutes with her personal phone and photographed pages. Not all of them. She was selective. The ones with the most significant names. The ones that described evidence being suppressed or witnesses being managed. The ones involving people in positions of public trust, a deputy commissioner, 2 city council members, a federal prosecutor who'd mysteriously dropped an investigation into the Rourke organization 4 years ago. And page 31. She photographed page 31 3 times, from 3 angles, because she needed it to be absolutely clear. On the 3rd night, Damien came home from a meeting earlier than expected. She was in the study when she heard his car. She had 40 seconds, she counted them later, reconstructing between the sound of his car door and the sound of his key in the front lock. She photographed the page she was on, closed the ledger, put it back under the charger in the drawer, and was standing at the kitchen counter making tea when he walked through the front door. "You're up late," he said. "Couldn't sleep again," she said. He looked at her for a moment with those eyes that saw everything, and she met his gaze and held it and willed her pulse to stay where it was. "You've seemed off this week," he said. "You okay?" "Just tired," she said. "I think I'm coming down with something." Across the kitchen, put the back of his hand against her forehead. The gesture was so genuinely tender, so completely at odds with the man who kept a ledger of other people's destruction that something cracked a little inside her chest, and she had to work to keep her face still. "You don't have a fever," he said. "Told you," she said. He made her tea. He sat with her at the kitchen counter at midnight while she drank it, and he talked about something inconsequential, a property deal in the North District, whether they should renovate the East Wing, and she listened and responded and thought, "This is the last time we'll ever sit here like this." She was right about that. She left on a Thursday before dawn. She'd arranged it carefully. A car she'd booked through a service Damien had no connection to, paid for, with a card attached to an account he didn't know existed. Her sister-in-law from her first year of college had been holding it for her. For 2 years, a favor Elena had asked for and never explained. The driver was told only to take her to a transit hub 40 minutes outside the city, where she'd arrange the next leg herself. She packed 1 bag, the kind you'd take for a weekend. She left her jewelry, her good clothes, her phone the main one, the one Damien paid for, sitting on the nightstand like a small surrender. She took her prepaid, the cash, the photographs on a memory card she'd had printed at a copy shop, her passport, and 2 changes of clothes. She stood in the bedroom doorway for a moment. Damien was asleep. In the low light, he looked like someone she'd fallen in love with, which was the cruelest thing about him. He'd never fully stopped being that person. He'd just also been someone else the whole time, running a parallel existence she'd never been invited into. She didn't leave a note. She'd thought about it and decided against it. Anything she wrote down would become a document, and she'd spent 3 days learning exactly what Damien did with documents. She walked out of the Blackwood estate at 4:47 in the morning, in the rain, with her bag over one shoulder, and she didn't look back. She was 34 years old, 11 weeks pregnant, carrying evidence that could dismantle a criminal empire, and she was almost entirely terrified. But underneath the terror was something she hadn't felt in so long she'd almost forgotten what to call it. It felt like air, the kind you could actually breathe. Damien's phone rang at 5:12. He was already awake, had been since 5, the way he usually was, lying in the gray pre-dawn light, reviewing whatever was already moving in his day. He'd reached for Elena without thinking, the automatic reach of someone used to another body in the bed, and found her side empty and cold. He'd gone still. He'd lain there for 3 minutes, running through explanations: bathroom, kitchen, insomnia, while some older, quieter instinct was already telling him the truth. Then he'd gotten up, walked through the bedroom, the bathroom, the hallway. He'd gone downstairs. He'd found the kitchen empty. He was standing in the middle of the kitchen when his phone rang. It was Greta, the head of his household security team. Mr. Rourke. There was a vehicle at the east gate at 4:47. We have it on camera. I thought you should know immediately. Damien said nothing for a long moment. The plates, he said. Rental. Already running it. She's on foot by now, he said. The vehicle was a relay. He said it with the flat, certain tone of a man who designed enough escapes himself to recognize the architecture. Check the transit hubs within an hour's drive. Flag anything outbound. Sir, should I alert the team? He looked at the kitchen counter. There was a mug sitting next to the kettle, still faintly warm. She'd made herself tea before she left. He touched the side of the mug and then set it down carefully, the way you set down something breakable. Not yet, he said. Just me for now. He hung up. He stood in the kitchen for another minute. Then he went to his study, opened the desk drawer, and lifted the ledger out from under the phone charger. He opened it to page 31. He stood there reading it for a long time, even though he knew every word by heart. Not the way you read something new. The way you read something you've been dreading for a long time, that has finally, after all the deferring and the maneuvering, arrived at your door. Closed the ledger, sat down in his chair. All right, Elena, he said, very quietly, to the empty room. He picked up his phone and called Marcus. Marcus Hale had been Damien's lieutenant for 11 years. He was the kind of man who was good at most things and exceptional at none, a reliable mid-range instrument in an organization that needed reliability more than it needed brilliance. He had a wife, 2 kids in private school, a house in the Western District that was slightly too large for what his official salary could support, and a habit, over the past 8 months, of having quiet conversations in places Damien had known about for 6 of those 8 months. She's gone, Damien said when Marcus picked up. Silence. Then, I'll alert the... You'll do nothing until I tell you, Damien said. Come to the estate now. Marcus arrived in 20 minutes. He sat across from Damien in the study and had the expression of a man who was trying to appear concerned while also calculating how much was already known about him. Damien recognized the expression. He'd been watching it develop on Marcus's face for months. She took files, Damien said, not a question. What you know what She took photographs, Damien said, of the ledger. I know because the page edges are slightly off on a handful of entries, which happens when you photograph something quickly in bad light and don't realize you've shifted it. She's been doing it for 3 days. Maybe 4. Marcus said nothing. The question, Damien said, is whether she knew what she was looking for before she found the ledger, or whether she found it by accident. Does it matter? It matters because if someone told her where to look, that person is in this room right now. Damien leaned back. So yes, Marcus, it matters considerably. The silence that followed was the kind that could go either direction, collapse into confession or harden into denial. Marcus had always been a man who chose the third option when it was available, redirect. She's a threat to the entire organization, he said. Rourke, whatever happened between you two, she's carrying information that could... I know what she's carrying, Damien said. His voice was the kind of quiet that made Marcus stop talking mid-sentence. She's carrying my child and information I've spent 10 years collecting, and I am going to find her. And when I find her, you are going to have nothing to do with what happens next. Are we clear? Marcus met his eyes. Something moved across his face, not quite fear, but the recognition that he was standing at the edge of something and had been miscalculating the distance. Clear, he said. Good, Damien said. Now get out. Elena reached the first safe house, a small apartment above a laundromat, in a city 2 hours east by 9 in the morning. She'd arranged it through a woman named Dara, someone she'd known years before Damien, before all of it, back when Elena had briefly volunteered at a legal aid nonprofit. Dara ran a network of transitional housing for women in crisis situations. She asked no questions she didn't need to ask, and the questions she did ask, she never wrote down. Elena had maintained the connection quietly, donating modest amounts through a trust account, attending no events, sending nothing with her name attached. It was the only relationship in her adult life she'd kept completely outside Damien's orbit. Dara met her at the apartment door with coffee and the particular expression of someone who understood the general shape of a situation without being told the details. "You look like you've been awake for 2 days," Dara said. Elena said. "Give me a few hours. How far along?" Elena looked at her. "I've done this a while," Dara said, without any particular emphasis. "You want a doctor? Not yet." Elena stepped inside. The apartment was plain and clean, 2 rooms, a window that faced a brick wall. It was the most private space she'd been in for years. "I need to make some calls first. Use the landline." "Not your cell, not even the prepaid, I know." Dara nodded. "There's food in the fridge. Rest first, then calls." Elena opened her mouth to argue, and then understood that Dara was right. She ate something she barely tasted, lay down on the narrow bed, and fell asleep within minutes with one hand on her stomach and the memory card in her closed fist. She slept for 4 hours. When she woke up, her prepaid phone had 2 missed calls from a number she didn't recognize. She stared at the number for a long time. Then she checked the landline, an old habit left over from her pre-Damien years of never fully trusting caller ID, and found the number Dara kept for emergencies. Called it. Dara answered on the first ring. "Someone's been asking around the transit hub," Dara said without preamble. "Not police, private. They're showing a photo." Elena closed her eyes. 4 hours. He'd been mobilized for 4 hours. How close? Not here yet. But they're moving outward from the hub in a pattern, which means they know the general direction, and they're mapping the radius. "I need to move, I know. I have somewhere. Give me an hour." Elena sat on the edge of the bed, the phone in her hand, and did the calculation she'd been avoiding since she'd first looked at that ledger. This wasn't going to be a quiet escape to a new city. Damien had the resources to follow a trail across state lines. Whatever advantage she had was built on time, and time was running out faster than she'd planned for. She needed leverage of her own. She looked at the memory card still in her palm. She'd photographed 61 pages. 61 pages that could collapse a criminal organization and destroy careers and send people to prison for decades. That wasn't just information. That was a weapon. And she'd spent 10 years married to a man who understood that the only thing more dangerous than having no weapon was having one and not knowing how to use it. Going to have to learn very quickly. The call she made next was to a number she'd stored in memory, never written down, never put in any phone. A journalist named Carla Webb, who worked for an investigative unit at a regional paper that had been sniffing around the edges of Rourke-adjacent corruption for 3 years without ever landing anything solid enough to publish. Elena had read Carla's work. She was careful, she was persistent, and she'd once written a piece out of a witness protection breakdown that had named the structural failures without once burning the protected individual. She was the right kind of journalist for what Elena was holding. Call went to voicemail. Elena left a message that said only, "I have documentation. 51 pages. I need a meeting. This number is good for 12 hours. She hung up. Then she packed her bag again, everything she'd unpacked, back in the bag in 4 minutes and waited for Dara's call. While she waited, she thought about Damien. Not the Damien of page 31, not the one who'd sat down with Nolan and agreed to the terms of a transaction. The one who'd made her tea at midnight, the one who'd said, "You seem off," and actually meant it. The one who was she had no illusions about this going to find her eventually, because Damien Rourke found everything eventually. The question she was turning over, the one she couldn't set down, was this: had he loved her? Not the arranged version, not the ledger version. After all of it, after the transaction and the control and the decade of managed living, had he at some point actually loved her? She didn't know. She suspected she might never know for certain. And she was starting to understand that it didn't change much either way. Because even if the answer was yes, even if he had genuinely, completely, imperfectly loved her, he had still built a life for her without her consent. He had still filed her name in a ledger next to evidence and leverage and all the other things he kept to protect himself. You could love someone and still treat them like a possession. Those two things could exist in the same man at the same time. She'd spent 10 years learning that lesson without ever quite seeing it clearly. She saw it now. Dara's call came 45 minutes later. There's a place. Woman named Ruth, she's solid. 3 hours north. You go tonight. They're moving faster than that, Elena said. I know. That's why you're not going directly. You go west first, then north. Takes longer, harder to map. Elena absorbed this. Dara, if they find you, they won't find what isn't there, Dara said simply. I've been doing this since before you were in high school. Stop worrying about me and start thinking about what you're going to do with those files. Elena looked at the memory card one more time. The weight of it in her palm was almost nothing smaller than her thumbnail, lighter than a key. I'm working on it, she said. Her prepaid buzzed. Unknown number. Text message. 4 words. I got your message. Carla Webb. Elena looked at the text for a long moment. Outside, the sounds of the city continued traffic. Someone's radio 2 floors down. Rain starting again against the brick wall. The world going on the way it always did, indifferent to the particular catastrophe unfolding in a small room above a laundromat. She texted back when and where. Then she shouldered her bag and walked out the door into whatever came next. She was scared. She was more than scared. There were moments in the stairwell, descending past the smell of laundry soap and the hum of machines, when the fear was so acute it was almost physical. Pressure behind her sternum, she had to breathe against deliberately. But she kept moving, because she had finally, after 10 years of standing still inside a life that had been constructed around her, without her knowledge, finally started moving in a direction she had chosen herself. And that, she thought, pushing through the door into the wet street, was not nothing. That was, in fact, everything. Carla Webb was not what Elena had pictured. She'd imagined someone sharper-edged, the kind of journalist who wore urgency like a second skin and talked fast and leaned across tables. The woman who walked into the back corner of a bus depot diner at 7:15 in the morning was medium height, early 40s, wearing a rain jacket that had seen better years and carrying a canvas bag that was visibly too heavy for its own handles. She moved without hurrying. She looked around the diner once, clocked Elena in the corner booth, and walked over without any signal between them. She sat down. She ordered coffee from the waitress, who materialized immediately. She waited until the waitress left before she said anything. You look like you've been running, she said. I have been, Elena said. For how long? About 14 hours. Carla wrapped both hands around the mug. The waitress sat down and studied Elena with the particular quality of attention that wasn't scrutiny exactly, more like she was filing away detail without judgment. The message you left said 61 pages. 58, actually. I said 61 because I wasn't sure you were the right person yet. Something shifted in Carla's expression, not offense, more like recalibration. Smart, she said. Whose ledger? Damien Rourke. The name landed. Carla didn't flinch, but the coffee mug stopped moving halfway to her mouth. She set it back down. Say that again. You heard me. Elena. A pause. That's your name, right? You're his wife. I was his wife this time yesterday, Elena said. Right now I'm the person who photographed 58 pages of his operational records and left before he woke up. So I need to know, before we go any further, whether you're the kind of journalist who publishes carefully or the kind who publishes fast. Carla looked at her for a long moment. Both when the material is right. Not both, one or the other. Pick. Another pause. Outside, a bus rumbled past the window, shaking the glass faintly. The diner smelled of old coffee and something fried from the kitchen. Carefully, Carla said. I publish carefully. Elena reached into the front pocket of her bag and set the memory card flat on the table between them. Carla looked at it. She didn't touch it. What's on it? Names that will mean something to you. A deputy commissioner. A federal prosecutor who shut down an investigation in 2019. 2 council members, and enough specifics about each of them to make every detail verifiable. And Rourke himself? Everything. Elena kept her hand near the card but didn't pull it back. His organization structure, his financial routing, evidence disposal. 3 names of people who disappeared in connection with his operations, and the entries he kept about each of them. Carla was very still. Why me? You could have gone to federal. Because federal has 2 people on his payroll. It's in the ledger. I'm not walking that card into a building where he already has eyes. Carla picked up the memory card. She turned it over once in her fingers, then set it in her jacket pocket. I need time to verify. I know, I'm talking weeks. You have days, Elena said, because the moment he figures out what I took, and he already knows I took something, I just don't know yet if he knows exactly what he's going to start moving people. Records will disappear. People will stop being reachable. She leaned forward slightly. The window is not weeks, Carla. Carla looked at her. You know what happens if I publish something this size without verification? We get sued into the ground and he walks clean. I know. That's why I'm telling you where to start. Elena slid a folded piece of paper across the table. Prosecutor. His name is on that page. Cross-reference the case number with the federal docket, it's public record. The investigation was opened in March 2019 and formally closed that November with a filing that cites insufficient evidence. Look at what they had before the closure. Then look at what's in my photographs. Carla unfolded the paper, read it, folded it again and put it in the same pocket as the card. Where are you going after this? She asked. Somewhere you don't know about, Elena said. I need a way to reach you. I'll reach you. Elena stood, picked up her bag. 72 hours. After that, I'm going to assume the window is closed, and I'll need a different plan. Elena. Carla said it quietly, with the weight of someone who'd covered enough stories to understand the texture of danger. Are you safe? Elena thought about Damien's men at the transit hub. The text messages she'd stopped checking. The way he'd said, I'll handle it in the dark, and meant it with a completeness that had never troubled her until now. Not particularly, she said. That's why the 72 hours matters. She left $30 on the table for the coffee. Neither of them had finished and walked out into the rain. Damien's estate felt wrong without her in it. He noticed it the way you noticed a sound that had stopped not the absence itself, but the quality of the silence where something you'd be. He'd spent 30 years building rooms that answered to him, spaces that existed to serve the function of his work, and the Blackwood estate had always been different. It had been different because of Elena, because she'd moved through it like it belonged to her, and somehow that had made it feel, for the first time in his life, like something more than infrastructure. He was standing at the window of his study at 8 in the morning when Marcus came back. He hadn't told Marcus to come back. That was the first thing. I said, "Get out," Damien said, without turning from the window. You did. Marcus closed the door behind him, and I did. And then I thought about the situation, and I came back, because there are things you need to hear that you're not going to want to hear. Damien turned around. He looked at Marcus for a moment, in the way he looked at things he was assessing, not angry, not cold, just precise. Go ahead. Marcus sat down across from the desk without being invited. Another first. She's not running blind, Rourke. Whatever she took from that ledger, she had a plan for it before she walked out. The vehicle at the gate was prearranged. She had cash. She had a secondary phone. Greta pulled the records on your household account, and there are 3 purchases in the past 18 months that don't match anything we can account for, all from the same area code, all cash-adjacent transactions through a prepaid card system. Damien sat down slowly. She's been planning this. For at least a year and a half. Yeah, the silence that followed had a different quality than the earlier one. Grief, more calculation. She knows about the ledger, Damien said. She photographed specific pages. Not all of them she was selective. How do you know she was selective? Because if she'd taken everything, she'd have gone straight to federal law enforcement, and I'd already have agents at the gate. He turned a pen over in his fingers, the small physical habit of a man who thought better when his hands were moving. She went somewhere else first, somewhere she trusts more than the feds. Marcus leaned forward. There's another problem. Tell me. Donovan's been making calls. Marcus said the name flatly, watching Damien's face. Since last night. To the Kerrigan family. 2 calls, the second one longer than the first. Donovan. Patrick Donovan, Damien's second in command, who had been with the organization for 14 years, and who had a daughter in college and a mortgage that was, on paper, entirely legitimate. Damien set the pen down. What kind of calls? The kind where you're talking to a rival organization about the current stability of the one you already work for. Marcus met his eyes. She's been gone for less than 12 hours, and Donovan is already sniffing for a lifeboat. Damien was quiet for a long moment. You're telling me this because you want me to know you're not Donovan. I'm telling you this because it's true and you need to know it, and because I owe you that much. Marcus paused. I've been talking to people I shouldn't have been talking to. You know that. I know you know that. But I am not feeding intelligence to the Kerrigans. Donovan is. And the 2 things are different because I was looking for an exit from this life, not a way to accelerate your downfall. Marcus held his gaze. There's a distinction. Damien stood up, walked to the window again. Below, the estate grounds were wet and gray, the gravel drive dark with overnight rain. Find Elena, he said, not the team, you. Personally. I want eyes on her location before nightfall. And Donovan? Leave Donovan to me. Marcus nodded and stood. He was at the door when Damien spoke again. Marcus. He didn't turn from the window. If you find her and I find out you made contact with her before I did, or that you told anyone in this organization where she is, before you told me, I want you to be very clear about what happens next. Marcus's hand was on the door handle. I understand. Make sure you do. The door opened and closed. Jamieson stood at the window alone. He thought about Elena photographing pages from his ledger in the dark while he slept 3 rooms away. Thought about her sitting across the kitchen counter from him at midnight while he talked about renovation plans, drinking tea, looking tired in a way he'd noticed, but not understood. Spent 10 years reading people for a living. He'd missed every sign. That told him something he didn't want to examine too closely. Not about her ability to deceive him, but about what he'd trained himself not to see. The things right in front of you that you don't look at, because looking at them means admitting something you're not ready to admit. He'd known, somewhere under everything, that the ledger existed as a fault line. He'd told himself that Elena would never find it. He'd also, without acknowledging it, structured his life around not having to tell her the truth about the beginning of things. It was not love. He understood that now in a way that was arriving too late and too clearly. That was management. The same thing he did with everyone else. He picked up his phone and called Greta. I need the name of every person Elena had contact with in the 2 years before she met me. Friends, work colleagues, anyone she maintained contact with after the wedding that I don't have a file on. Pause. That could take some time. Start now, he said. The second safe house was a ground-floor unit in a row of identical duplexes in a small city that felt like it had been paused sometime around 2003 and never quite restarted. The woman Ruth, who Dara had promised was solid, turned out to be a compact woman in her 60s with a gray braid down her back and the particular calm of someone who had seen many women arrive at her door, looking the way Elena looked and had long since stopped being surprised by any of it. Ruth didn't ask about the bag or the exhaustion, or the way Elena checked the window before she sat down. She made soup, from actual ingredients, not something from a can, and set it on the table and sat across from Elena while she ate it. Dara said you're in something complicated, Ruth said. One word for it. You got somewhere to be in the next day or two? Someone expecting you? I have a contact. Journalist. She's working on verifying some material I gave her. Ruth nodded slowly. And the other side, they looking hard? Very hard. They're good at it. Are they the kind of good that involves law enforcement cooperation? Elena thought about the entries in the ledger. The deputy commissioner's name. Prosecutor. Some of it. Yes. Ruth made a sound that wasn't quite a word. She got up and moved to the window, looked out at the empty street, the particular look of someone running a threat assessment, casual and practiced. I've got 2 other women here right now. Different situations. I need to know if yours puts them at risk. Elena looked at her directly. I don't think so. The people looking for me are looking quietly. They don't want attention. Going through official channels would create a paper trail they can't control. For now, Ruth said. For now, Elena agreed. Ruth nodded. You stay in your room. You don't interact with the others. You don't use the Wi-Fi, I'll get you a hotspot. And you sleep. You look like you're running on nothing. I'm 11 weeks pregnant, Elena said. She hadn't planned to say it. It came out flat, informational, like she was reading off a form. Ruth looked at her for a moment. Then she said, All right. I'll get you prenatal vitamins in the morning. Anything else you need? Elena almost laughed. The straightforwardness of it, no fuss, no performance of sympathy. Just all right. What next was so different from the 10 years she'd just exited that it made her throat tighten. That's enough for now, she said. She slept 9 hours and woke up to her prepaid buzzing. It wasn't Carla. It was a number she didn't recognize, different from the one that had called the day before at the first safe house. She stared at it for a moment, then let it go to voicemail. No message was left. She called Dara. Someone's been calling this number, she said. Not Carla. Someone else. How'd they get it? Dara's voice was steady, but she heard the undertone. I don't know, maybe the transit hub, maybe something else. Elena sat on the edge of the bed, her feet flat on the floor. The room was plain and smelled faintly of cedar. How secure is this location? Secure enough that no one's walked in yet. Not secure enough to be permanent. I need to move again. Not yet, Dara said. Moving again this fast creates a visible pattern. Give it another 12 hours. I'll see what I can find out about the number. Elena hung up. She ate the granola bar Ruth had left outside her door and drank water and tried to think clearly about the next 48 hours. The photographs were with Carla. If Carla moved fast and the verification held, there was a window narrow, closing where publication would make Elena less vulnerable rather than more. Once the material was out, silencing her became a liability rather than a solution. That was the calculation she'd made before she left the estate. The problem was the window. And the problem within the problem was that she hadn't accounted for how many fronts Damien could run simultaneously. He was looking for her. He was managing his organization through whatever internal fractures had opened in her absence. He was calculating what she'd taken and what she was going to do with it. And he was doing all three of those things at once without sleeping, with the kind of focused efficiency that had always been one of the things she'd found most extraordinary about him. She sat with that for a moment, the strange dissonance of admiring the capacity of the man who was hunting her. Then she pushed it aside and called Carla. I need a timeline, Elena said when Carla picked up. I verified 2 entries last night. Carla's voice was stripped of everything extraneous. She was in work mode, the kind Elena had hoped for. Prosecutor and one of the council members. The paper trail is exactly where you said it would be. And it's significant. The prosecutor's story alone is publishable. But my editor wants more time. He's nervous. He wants a second source independent of the photographs. Elena closed her eyes. You don't have time for a second source. I'm aware. I'm working on it, Carla. I found something else, Carla said. On the card. A pause. There's a name that comes up in 3 separate entries. Not as a target, as a provider. Someone who was feeding information to Rourke's organization from inside a law enforcement agency. The entry suggests this person has been active for at least 6 years. Elena sat very still. A name, yes. Someone I'd recognize? I think so. I want to run it by you, Carla said the name. Elena felt the floor shift under her. She knew the name. She knew it because the person attached to it had sat across from her at a dinner table more times than she could count. Had been at her wedding. Had held her hand at the funeral of a colleague 2 years ago. Someone Damien had introduced to her as a friend. He's been in my house, Elena said. I know. Does he know, does Damien know that his name is on those pages? I don't know what Rourke knows, Carla said. What I do know is that if this person figures out that you have a card with his name on it, your situation changes considerably. Elena pressed her palm flat against her sternum, the old instinct, trying to physically hold her chest together. How considerably? From powerful man looking for his wife to law enforcement asset with a direct professional interest in making material disappear. Carla let that land, and in making the person carrying it disappear with it. The room felt smaller than it had been 30 seconds ago. Elena stood up, crossed to the window, looked out at the empty street the same way Ruth had done. How long until you can publish? 48 hours minimum. My editor needs— I don't care what your editor needs, Elena said, and her voice had an edge in it she didn't recognize, or maybe she recognized it but had never heard it turned outward before. Someone with a badge and a direct interest in stopping this story now knows or will shortly know that I'm carrying evidence of his involvement in a federal crime. I need that material out before he can move against it. Elena, if I rush this and it falls apart in print, then rush it right, she said. I'm not asking you to be sloppy. I'm asking you to understand that the clock is not abstract anymore. Silence on the line. Then I'll call you in 6 hours. The call ended. Elena stood at the window for a long time. The street below was quiet mid-morning, a residential area, a woman walking a dog in the light rain, a kid on a bicycle 2 houses down. The ordinary geography of a life that had nothing to do with ledgers and leverage, and 12 years of carefully constructed deception. She thought about the name Carla had said. She thought about the dinner tables and the wedding and the hand-holding at the funeral. Then she took out her prepaid phone and did something she'd told herself she absolutely was not going to do. Called her brother. Nolan picked up on the second ring. Elena. His voice did something complicated, relief and guilt arriving in the same word, fighting each other for space. You know why I'm calling, she said. A long pause. Traffic sounds in the background on his end, somewhere outdoors. Where are you? Don't do that. I'm not telling you where I am. Elena, tell me about the money, she said. Tell me about what you did and what you agreed to, and I want the version where you don't leave anything out. I've seen the ledger, Nolan. I've read the entry. So you can decide right now whether you tell me the truth or whether I hang up and you live the rest of your life knowing that I left this conversation with only his version of it. The silence this time was different from the other silences of the past 2 days. It had a particular texture, the silence of someone who has been carrying something for years and has just been given permission to put it down, except that putting it down means breaking something that might not be repairable. I was drowning, Nolan said finally. His voice had changed, the easy charm stripped back to something rawer underneath. You know I'd borrowed from Petrov's people. You knew some of it. I knew about money trouble. I didn't know the amount. The amount was, he stopped. It was bad. It was the kind of bad that doesn't stay financial for very long. Petrov's people had started making other suggestions about how the debt could be restructured. And you went to Damien. Someone told me he had influence with Petrov's network, that he could make it go away. A breath. I went to a meeting. I thought it was going to be a renegotiation. It was I didn't realize until I was already there that Rourke was someone different, that he operated on a different level, and he offered you a deal. He settled the full debt with Petrov's people that night. No renegotiation, no timeline, just gone. And then he told me what he wanted. Elena pressed her back against the wall, her free hand flat against the plaster. He wanted to meet me. He said he'd seen you somewhere. A photograph, I think, or maybe someone had mentioned, I don't remember exactly. He said he wanted an introduction. A real one, not forced, just an occasion where he'd be present, and so would you. Nolan's voice was very quiet now. He said it wouldn't be a transaction. He said he just wanted the opportunity. And you believed that. I told myself I did. A pause. Elena, I watched him in that room, and he wasn't what I expected. He wasn't brutal. He was careful, and he was intelligent, and he said things about you, about the kind of person he'd heard you were, that didn't sound like a man making a business move. Kept a record of it, Nolan. In the same book, where he kept evidence of crimes and leverage over people whose lives he controlled. He filed our introduction under insurance. The silence on Nolan's end was the worst kind. The kind where there's nothing useful to say. Did you know about the ledger? She asked. No. Did you know he was still using it? That he had entries on everyone around him, including me? No. More firmly. Elena, I swear to you. But you knew about the beginning. You knew, and you let me spend 10 years in a marriage, whose foundation was a transaction you made to save yourself. And you never told me. She heard his breathing on the other end. Uneven, the way it got when he was trying not to fall apart. And saving grace had always been that he actually felt things, even the things he'd done wrong. It just never seemed to translate into doing less of them. I'm sorry, he said. It came out stripped of everything performative. Just the 2 words, flat and insufficient. I know you are, she said. What are you going to do? Something that might protect you, or might make everything worse for you, depending on how the next 48 hours go. I can't tell you which yet. She straightened up from the wall. Nolan, I need to know one more thing. Anything. The man whose name is on certain pages of that ledger, the one who's been feeding information to Damien for 6 years, did you know about him? Pause that was too long. What name? She said it. Pause that followed told her everything before Nolan opened his mouth. Elena, he said. How did you know? I met him once. Once? At a dinner that I didn't understand the context of at the time. I didn't know what he did. I didn't know his stop. I pieced some of it together later. Maybe 3 years ago. I didn't know the scope. And you didn't tell me. What was I going to tell you? That your husband was running an informant inside federal law enforcement? What would you have done with that? I would have left, she said. 3 years ago, she heard him absorb that. Heard him sit with the weight of it, not just the secret he'd kept, but the 3 years it had cost her. Is he dangerous? Nolan asked. The man on the ledger. Is he coming after you? I don't know yet, she said. Maybe. Elena, come to me. Let me know, she said immediately. You're the first place anyone would look, and you know it. She picked up her bag, started running the calculation again. How long she had in this location, what came next, who was moving where. Nolan, if anyone contacts you, anyone at all, even someone you recognize, you don't know where I am. You don't know anything about any phone. You haven't heard from me. Okay, I mean it. I know you mean it, he said. Elena, I love you. I know you do, she said. That's the thing about this family. Everyone loves everyone, and somehow it still keeps going wrong. She ended the call. She stood in the middle of Ruth's spare room with her bag on her shoulder and the prepaid in her hand, and the understanding, arriving with total clarity, that the situation had just changed shape. Because the name on the ledger, the informant with the badge, who'd been inside Damien's network for 6 years, was not going to wait for a newspaper to publish a story about him. He was going to move the moment he knew the card existed. And if Nolan had met him, even once, then Damien could find the connection and use it to trace her route. Every thread she'd been carefully managing was starting to pull at once. She called Dara. I need to move now, she said. Not in 12 hours. Now Dara heard her tone. Give me 20 minutes. You have 15. She sat on the edge of the bed and counted the minutes physically, watching the second hand on the plain clock above the door. She thought about page 31, and about Nolan's voice saying I told myself I did, and about Damien standing at the kitchen counter at midnight, making her tea with no idea that every move she'd been making for the past 72 hours had been aimed at the door. Or maybe he had known. Maybe some part of him had known for years and had filed it away in the same ledger under the same category as every other contingency he'd planned for. Maybe that was the thing she'd never be sure of, how much of what they'd built together had been real and how much had been management, and whether at the point they'd merged together it even mattered. Her phone buzzed. Dara. She picked up. The number that called your prepaid, Dara said, and her voice had changed. Tighter. I traced it back through a relay. It's connected to a law enforcement account. The world narrowed to a point. He already knows the number, Elena said. Yes, he's been trying to locate me through the calls. Elena, drop the prepaid right now. Take the SIM out and destroy it. Use the landline at Ruth's for the next hour, and then you need to be somewhere else. She was already moving. She pulled the SIM card from the phone, snapped it, and dropped both pieces in the wastebasket. She picked up her bag. Where am I going? There's a bus. It leaves the depot 6 blocks from Ruth's in 40 minutes. Take it. There's a woman on the bus. She'll be sitting in the 3rd row. She has a red scarf. She'll hand you something when you sit down. Don't talk to her. Just take it. What is it? A new phone. New number. New contact for Carla. I'll get word to her directly. Go, Dara said simply. Elena went. She walked the 6 blocks in the rain, shoulders up, bag close, moving at the pace of someone with an ordinary destination. She bought a bus ticket with cash. She found her seat. The woman in the 3rd row was knitting something in dark blue yarn. She didn't look up when Elena sat down across the aisle. But when the bus lurched forward from the depot, the woman's hand moved casually to the seat between them and left a small phone there, already powered on. Elena picked it up without looking at the woman, put it in her jacket pocket, stared out to the rain-streaked window as the city fell away behind the bus. She was 50 miles from the Blackwood estate. She had 58 pages of evidence, with a journalist racing against a closing window. She had a federal informant who now knew she existed and had a phone number and was running his own calculation about what to do with that information. And she was carrying a child who didn't know any of this, whose only world was the small warm dark of Elena's body, completely insulated from everything that was falling apart around it. She pressed her hand against her stomach. The bus moved north through the rain. It was not safe. She was not close to safe. But she was still moving, still choosing the next thing. Still the person holding the only copy of a truth that could rewrite the last decade of her life. That was what she had. It would have to be enough. This is a work of fiction created entirely for entertainment purposes. All characters, organizations, and events are imaginary. The bus smelled like wet coats and somebody's fast food and the particular staleness of recycled air that never quite turned over. Elena sat 3 rows from the back and kept her eyes on the window and counted mile markers the way she used to count her own heartbeat during panic attacks in her early 20s, not because the numbers meant anything, just because having something to count kept the rest of her mind from running too fast in the wrong direction. The new phone was cheap and light in her jacket pocket. She didn't take it out on the bus. She waited. The woman with the red scarf got off 4 stops before Elena's. They never made eye contact. Elena watched her walk across the wet parking lot of a strip mall without hurrying, get into a gray sedan, and drive away with the complete ordinariness of someone running an errand. She'd been in Dara's network long enough to have made an art of invisibility. Elena filed that away somewhere, the idea that there were women all over this city, all over every city, who had turned the practice of not being found into a kind of fluency. She got off at the end of the line, a transit hub in a mid-sized town that felt transient by design, the kind of place built to move people through rather than hold them. She found a bathroom, locked herself in a stall, and took out the new phone. There was one contact already programmed. The label just said C. Called it. Carla answered in 2 rings. I was told to expect this number. It's me, Elena said. I know, a pause. She could hear Carla moving, the sound of a door closing somewhere on her end. Things have changed in the last 3 hours. Elena's stomach tightened. Tell me. Someone contacted my editor. Carla's voice was flat and controlled, in the way voices got, when the speaker was working hard to stay professional around something that was making them want to be anything but. Not officially. Personal call to his cell, which means someone with access to private contact information. The call suggested that the story we're working on involves fabricated documentation, and that publishing it would expose the paper to significant legal liability. Elena pressed her free hand against the stall door. What did your editor say? He put the story on hold pending legal review. The words arrived and then arrived again. The way bad news, sometimes did you heard it, and then your brain made you hear it a second time, because it hadn't fully processed the first pass. Legal review, Elena said. 24 to 48 hours. Maybe more. A pause. Elena, I want to be clear, I believe the material. I've verified enough of it that I know what you gave me is real. But my editor is a call, Elena said. To your editor. Who was it? A silence that told her Carla already knew and had been deciding whether to say it. The name he was given was a senior attorney representing interests connected to the Rourke organization, Carla said. But the cell number that placed the call is registered to a law enforcement agency. The informant, the name on the ledger. He hadn't waited for the newspaper to publish. He'd moved against the newspaper directly, and he'd done it in less than 12 hours from the moment Carla's paper had started making verification calls. Elena thought about how that timeline worked. Carla making calls to verify entries in the ledger. Those calls landing with people prosecutors, council members, staffers who either were in Damien's network or knew people who were. One of those calls, somewhere in the chain, had pinged the man whose name was on those pages. And he'd moved immediately, precisely, without hesitation. 6 years as an informant inside a federal agency. You didn't survive 6 years in that position by being slow. He knows I gave you the card, Elena said. I think he's been tracking the verification calls, yes. Does he know where I am? I don't know what he knows. Carla's voice dropped slightly. Elena, I need to tell you something else. My editor got a second call, 20 minutes after the first one. This one from someone inside the department I cover, a source I trust. He told me to kill the story, and he told me she stopped. He told me that the woman who supplied the documentation was a person of interest in an ongoing federal investigation. The bathroom tile was cold through Elena's jacket, where she'd leaned back against the wall of the stall. She was aware of her own breathing too shallow, not enough air getting through. That's not true, she said. I know it's not true, Carla said. That's why I'm still on this call instead of having already killed my notes. But Elena, they're building a frame around you. Fast. Whatever you're carrying, whoever you got it from, they're going to make the story about you, before I can make it about the ledger. Elena closed her eyes. She stood in the locked bathroom stall of a bus depot, in a town she'd never been to before, and let the full shape of what was happening arrive, without trying to push it away. The informant had done in 12 hours what Damien would have taken days to accomplish. Because he had a badge. Because he had a direct line to the kinds of institutions that shaped official narratives. Because he understood that the fastest way to bury evidence was not to destroy it, but to discredit the person carrying it. What do you need? Elena said. Her voice had gone somewhere quieter and more careful than it had been before. Not calm exactly. Something past the point where panic was useful. Second source, Carla said. Someone who can corroborate one of the entries independently. Someone whose testimony doesn't run through you and can't be connected to you. I have someone, Elena said before she'd fully decided to say it. Pause. Who? Give me 2 hours, Elena said. Don't kill your notes. Don't talk to your editor again until I call you. She hung up. She stood in the stall for another 30 seconds, running the option she'd just volunteered before she committed to it. Nolan. He was the only person outside of Damien's organization who had first-hand knowledge of the ledger's existence, or rather of the transaction it recorded. He couldn't corroborate the entries about the prosecutor or the council members, but he could confirm the originating entry. He could tell Carla, on record, that the arrangement on page 31 was real, that he had been present for it, that Damien Rourke had structured Elena's introduction in exchange for a settled debt. That alone wouldn't dismantle the organization. But it would do something more immediately useful. It would establish Elena's credibility as a source. It would make her a witness rather than a suspect. It would give Carla's editor something human and verifiable to put against the official pressure bearing down on the story. The problem was that the moment Nolan went on record, he was exposed. The debt, the arrangement, his role in all of it would become part of the public record. It would destroy whatever careful distance he'd maintained from Damien's world for the past decade. It might also destroy their relationship in a way that couldn't be repaired if Elena was the one who'd pushed him into that exposure. She unlocked the stall, washed her hands at the sink, looked at herself in the spotted mirror above the basin. She looked like someone who hadn't slept properly in 3 days, which was accurate. She looked like someone who was making decisions that couldn't be unmade, which was also accurate. Called Nolan. He picked up on the first ring. He'd been waiting. I need you to do something, she said. And I need you to understand that I'm asking you, not telling you, and that whatever you decide, I won't use it against you. Tell me what it is first, he said. She told him. The silence that followed was long enough that she thought the call had dropped. On record, he said finally. You're asking me to go on record. To one journalist. Under controlled conditions. Carla Webb, look her up. She has a track record of protecting sources when they cooperate. The story protects you more than silence does, Nolan. Right now you're a loose thread. If this story falls apart because I can't verify it, you're still a loose thread, but now you're one connected to a failed attempt to expose Damien Rourke. Worse. And if the story runs, then you're someone who came forward with information about criminal conduct. That's different, Elena. His voice was tired. I'm not a hero in this story. I know, she said. Neither am I. We're just people trying to get to the other side of something we should have dealt with years ago. Another silence. Shorter this time. Where do I meet her? He said. They arranged it for that evening, a hotel conference room in a neutral city, booked under a name Carla used for sensitive meetings. Elena was not going to be present. That was the condition she'd set with both of them. Nolan's testimony had to stand on its own, unconnected from her physical location. She spent the intervening hours at the bus depot, in a corner of the waiting area, with a clear sight line to all 3 entrances, drinking bad coffee from a vending machine and watching the doors. Nothing moved that looked wrong, but she'd stopped trusting the absence of visible threat. The past 12 hours had demonstrated fairly completely that the danger in her situation was not the kind that announced itself at a distance. At 4 in the afternoon, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She stared at it. Different from the numbers that had called, the prepaid. This was coming through the new phone, the one Dara's network had provided, the one whose number should have been known only to Dara and Carla. She answered. Mrs. Rourke. The voice was male, mid-range. Careful in the way that trained people were careful, no regional accent, no register that would place him. I think you know who this is. She knew. The name from the ledger. The informant. How did you get this number? She said. That's not the productive question, he said. The productive question is what happens next. Tell me what you think happens next, she said. Her voice surprised her steady, the kind of steady that came not from confidence, but from having exhausted the part of herself that was capable of being frightened into silence. You have documentation, he said. Some of it involves me. I'd like to discuss a resolution that doesn't require either of us to go through what comes after the documentation is published. There's nothing to discuss, Elena. He said her name with a deliberate familiarity that made her skin tighten. I've been managing information flow in this city for 6 years. I know every channel your journalist is going to try to use. I can close them faster than she can open them. I've already demonstrated that today. Pressured her editor. I protected myself, he said. Which is what I'm trying to do right now, in a way that doesn't require me to be more aggressive about it. She understood what more aggressive meant. She understood it in the specific, physical way. You understood threats when you'd spent a decade in proximity to men who knew how to make them without ever saying anything that could be recorded and used. What are you offering? She said. Not because she was going to accept anything. Because she needed him to talk. You give me the card. All copies. I verify that the documentation is surrendered completely. And then I make the person of interest framing. Go away, you go back to being what you are, which is a woman who left her husband, and none of the rest of this needs to happen. And the ledger? And Damien's organization? Not your problem anymore. The names in those entries, she said. The prosecutor. Council members. The people Damien has been controlling for a decade. Also not your problem. They're still going to be doing what they've been doing. Yes, he said without any inflection. Just the word, flat and honest in its complete indifference. She sat with that for a moment. The honesty of it was almost worse than a lie would have been. I need time to think about it, she said. You have until 9 o'clock tonight. A pause. Elena, I want you to know that I'm the moderate option. There are people around Damien Rourke who have suggested approaches that I've been actively arguing against. I'm calling you before they get authorization to move in a different direction. Is that a threat? It's a context, he said, 9 o'clock. The line went dead. Put the phone face down on the plastic seat beside her and pressed both hands against her knees and breathed through the next 60 seconds with the deliberate mechanics of someone managing the point where panic tried to become paralysis. He had her number, which meant Dara's network had a leak, or the new phone had been compromised at origin, or someone in the chain between Dara and the woman with the red scarf was not who they were supposed to be. She picked up the phone and called Dara. Dara picked up. I know, she said immediately, which meant she already knew something was wrong. The new number, Elena said, he has it. A pause that was too long and too textured to be nothing. Dara, Elena said carefully. Ruth's second guest, Dara said. The other woman staying there. She's been there 3 weeks, and I've had no reason to, Elena. I think she's been inside your room. Elena was on her feet before she'd consciously decided to stand. What does she look like? Late 30s, dark hair, she said she was. Dara stopped. Doesn't matter what she said she was. I'm sorry. I didn't. It's done, Elena said. It's done, Dara. It's not. I need to focus. Is there anything in that room that I left behind? She ran through it mentally. She'd packed everything. She'd been careful. The SIM from the prepaid was destroyed. But she'd used the landline at Ruth's to call Carla that morning. Before the new phone. Before the relay. If someone had been in that room before she left, they could have had access to the landline records. They could have traced the outgoing call to Carla's number. And from Carla's number to Carla's identity to Carla's editor. The editor's call. The pressure on the story. She'd assumed that came from her verification calls being traced through the network. But it had come faster than that. It had come from Ruth's house. The woman at Ruth's hadn't just gotten Elena's new phone number. She'd been there when Elena made the first call, and that first call had started the whole chain of official pressure in motion. Elena walked to the far wall of the depot and stood with her back against it and made herself reconstruct the timeline clearly. 12 hours ago, Elena at Ruth's calls Carla from landline. Landline traced, Carla identified, pressure on editor begins. 8 hours ago, Elena leaves Ruth's, takes bus, gets new phone. Somewhere in that transition, new phone number leaked to the informant, which meant the woman at Ruth's had not been working alone. She'd been working with someone who had access to Dara's distribution network to the specific channel that had provided the new phone. That wasn't just a leak. That was an infiltration. She called Carla again. The source of the pressure on your editor, Elena said, without preamble. It didn't come from your verification calls. It came from a tap on a landline I used this morning. Your number was identified before your paper made a single call. Pause. It means whoever's running the counter-pressure has been ahead of us since this morning. Not reacting to us. Anticipate, Elena. Carla's voice was careful. Nolan is already on his way to the meeting. I can't pull that back now. Elena felt the next thing arrive before she fully understood it. Carla, she said slowly. Who knew about the meeting location? You, me. No, who booked the room? I did. Through a stop. Through my assistant. But she's been with me for... Call her right now, Elena said. Ask her who she spoke to about the booking. Elena, she wouldn't. Call her. Elena was already moving toward the depot exit, scanning the entrance and the parking lot beyond the glass doors. And call Nolan right now. Tell him to change location. Can't reach him on that number. He said he was. Elida was already outside in the rain, phone pressed to her ear, running the calculation of distance and time, and what it meant if Nolan had already arrived at the hotel, and whoever had traced that meeting back through the booking was already... Carla, listen to me. Text Nolan. Text every number you have for him. Tell him to leave the location immediately and go somewhere public. The hotel. Somewhere open. I'm doing it, Carla said, the professional composure finally cracking at the edges. Elena, what is happening right now? Someone built a cage, Elena said, and I walked us into it. She stood in the rain outside the bus depot and felt the full weight of it, not just the danger to Nolan, not just the collapsed timeline and the pressured editor and the compromised phone, but the deeper thing underneath all of it. She'd spent 3 days thinking she was running her own plan. Moving carefully, choosing selectively, building toward a publication that would make her untouchable. But somebody had been ahead of her the whole time. At Ruth's house before she got there, in Dara's network before she'd used it, in Carla's editorial chain before a single verification call was made. This had not been a reaction to her escape. This had been a prepared response, which meant that somewhere, someone had known she might run, had built infrastructure to contain the running before it started, had placed a woman in a safe house that Elena would predictably be directed to by a network they'd predictably infiltrated, knowing Elena would make calls, knowing she'd need a journalist, knowing the specific shape that her escape would take. She stood completely still in the rain, water running down the back of her neck, and let the implication of that arrive in full. Damien hadn't just kept a ledger of other people's vulnerabilities. He had mapped hers, not page 31, something worse than page 31. He had prepared for the possibility that she would find the ledger, or find something else, or reach some breaking point, and try to leave. And instead of preventing it, he had let it happen and built a container around it, so that wherever she ran into walls he'd already constructed. The woman at Ruth's wasn't the informant's asset. She was Damien's. Carla's assistant hadn't been turned by the informant. She'd been turned or placed months ago, against the contingency of exactly this moment. The new phone from Dara's network hadn't been leaked by an infiltration Dara didn't know about. Dara's network itself had been mapped, maybe not compromised from within, but mapped from without, by someone with the resources and patience to understand every possible exit route Elena might use, and to build a presence in each one, waiting. Her phone buzzed. A text from Carla, Nolan not responding. Hotel says he checked in 20 minutes ago. Then, 30 seconds later, another text, there are 2 men in the lobby who were not there when I made the booking. Elena stared at the text. Then she called the only number she had left. She called Damien. He answered before the second ring. He'd been waiting for this call. She understood. The same way he'd been waiting for everything else, not with urgency, but with the absolute settled patience of a man who had calculated the moment and was simply marking time until it arrived. Elena, he said. Call them off, she said. Her voice was shaking now, the steadiness finally gone, because her brother was in a hotel lobby with 2 of Damien's men, and she was standing in the rain outside a bus depot 60 miles away, and there was nothing left to manage with. Nolan is fine, Damien said, with a flatness that was not cruelty, but was worse than cruelty, because it was just fact. He'll stay fine. That's entirely up to you. This was never just about finding me, she said. You knew I'd run. You let me run. A pause. I let you start, he said. Yes. Why? Because I needed to know what you'd do with what you found. His voice didn't change register. If you'd gone straight to federal, the outcome would have been different. If you'd gone to the press without thinking it through, different again. I needed to understand what you actually wanted. What I wanted, she said flatly. What you wanted, he repeated. Not revenge. Not money. Not even exposure. What you actually wanted at the end of all of this. Because that determines what happens next. She stood in the rain and understood, with a clarity that was almost physical in its precision, that she had never been running free. Not for a single hour of the past 3 days. She had been running inside a structure he'd built, and every choice she'd made had been a data point in a calculation she hadn't known she was part of. And she was out of moves. The journalist's story was stalled. Her brother was contained. The informant was offering a false choice between surrender and escalation. And Damien was on the other end of a phone call she'd placed herself, because she'd had nowhere else to go. "Tell me what you want," she said, not because she was surrendering, because she was still thinking, even now, even here, standing in the rain at the bottom of the deepest hole the past 3 days had dug. She was still thinking. "Come back," he said. "No," she said immediately. "Then come to a meeting," he said. "Somewhere you choose. Public, you set the terms, and we talk." "About what?" "About the thing that's actually in that ledger," he said. "Not the entries you photographed. The one you don't know exists yet." She stopped breathing for a moment. "What entry?" she said. A pause that had a different quality from all his other pauses. This one wasn't calculation. It was the particular hesitation of a man deciding whether to say a true thing he has been holding back for a very long time. "The reason I've been protecting you," he said, "is not in any page you photographed. And if you walk away from this without knowing it, you will spend the rest of your life understanding only half of what happened to you." The rain hit the pavement around her feet, and the bus depot hummed behind her and 60 miles away. Her brother was in a hotel lobby with 2 of Damien's men, and the journalist who'd believed her was watching a story die in editorial hold somewhere the informant was counting down to 9 o'clock. And Elena Voss Rourke stood in the middle of it all and realized that the thing she'd been most afraid of being trapped had already happened. The only question left was what she was going to do inside the trap. This is a work of fiction created entirely for entertainment purposes. All characters, organizations, and events are imaginary. She stood in the rain for another 40 seconds after the call ended. 40 seconds of doing absolutely nothing, which was the hardest thing she'd done in 3 days. Not running, not calling, not calculating, just standing. Letting the rain hit her face and her shoulders, and letting the cold of it get through her jacket and reach her skin, because she needed to feel something that was entirely physical and entirely outside her own head. Then she moved. She went back inside the depot, found the women's restroom, locked herself in the same stall she'd used before. She sat on the closed lid of the toilet, with her back straight and her feet flat on the floor, and she made herself think without emotion for exactly 5 minutes. She gave herself 5 minutes because that was all she had. Damien had said, "Come to a meeting, somewhere you choose." Public. He'd also said, "There's something in the ledger you haven't seen yet." Both of those things could be true. Both of them could also be moves in a game she didn't have the full board for. That was the problem with Damien. He had never once in 10 years made a gesture that was purely emotional. Every kindness had a function. Every concession had a calculation behind it. But he'd let Nolan go. She'd checked Carla had texted again 7 minutes after the call. Nolan just walked out. "He's okay." What happened? Damien had released Nolan the moment Elena called. Not as a reward for calling, as a demonstration. As proof of concept, I can do this. And I can also undo it. And the difference between those two outcomes is whether you come to the table. She hated that she understood him that well. She hated that understanding him didn't make her trust him. She called Carla. "Nolan is out," Elena said. "I know." Called me. Carla paused. "He's shaken up." They didn't touch him. But 2 men sitting 15 feet away from you for 20 minutes and not saying a word is its own kind of message. "I need you to do something," Elena said. "And I need you to do it before 9 o'clock tonight." "The story is still alive," Elena said. "My editor being pressured doesn't kill the story. Slows it. There's a difference." She kept her voice level and precise, forcing the words into a shape that was action rather than panic. "The entries you've already verified the prosecutor. The council member, you don't need my card for those. You verified them independently. That means those 2 entries can be reported on without the card as the primary source." Silence on Carla's end. The silence of someone doing math. "A narrower story," Carla said slowly. "A first story. Smaller. Verifiable without me in it. No mention of the card, no mention of a source inside the Rourke household. Just the paper trail you found through public records. Elena pressed her free hand against her knee to stop her leg from shaking. Can you file that by 9? Your editor is being pressured by someone who is worried about the full story. He's not necessarily worried about a story built entirely from public records that your paper independently verified. A pause. Carla, can you file it? A longer silence. Elena heard the sound of a chair, papers moving, the particular shuffling of someone shifting into a different gear. I'll call you back in 30 minutes, Carla said. Professional Crispness was back, the version of Carla that moved fast when she saw the angle. Elena ended the call and looked at the time. 6:47 p.m. She had 2 hours and 13 minutes until the informant's deadline. She had 30 minutes until Carla called back, and she had to pick a location for a meeting with her husband that was public enough to be safe and contained enough for whatever conversation he was describing. She thought about the city she was in, unfamiliar, mid-sized, the kind of place with a downtown that had tried to revitalize itself and partially succeeded. She'd seen it from this bus window coming in. A main street with restaurants and a renovated hotel and what looked like a covered market that might be open on weeknights. She pulled up the map on the new phone, searched for the market. Open until 9. Indoor space, multiple exits, foot traffic from the attached restaurant strip. She texted Damien the address, then she added, 8 o'clock. Come alone or don't come at all. His reply came in under a minute, alone. She stared at the word for a moment. One word, no punctuation. Either he meant it completely or it was the most efficient lie he'd ever told her, and with Damien, that was a distinction she'd never been able to make from a distance. She unlocked the stall, washed her face at the sink, looked at herself in the mirror. She looked worse than she had that morning. She looked like someone who had been running for 3 days, on bad sleep and vending machine coffee, and the kind of adrenaline that eventually turned toxic. She also looked, she thought, like someone who had stopped waiting for permission to be in charge of her own situation. That was something. She squared her shoulders, picked up her bag, and walked out of the depot into the city. She got to the market at 7:30 and spent the first 20 minutes walking every section of it, the produce stalls near the east entrance, the prepared food vendors along the south wall, open corridor in the center where foot traffic moved in both directions, and where she could stand with her back to a support pillar and see every approach. She found her position, third pillar from the north entrance. Clear sight lines in 4 directions, 20 feet from an exit that opened onto a side street. Close enough to the food vendors that standing still didn't look wrong. She stood there and she waited. Carla called at 7:42. My editor approved a limited filing. The prosecutor's story. Public records only, no source identification, no card mentioned. A beat. It goes live at midnight. Elena felt something release in her chest that she hadn't known she'd been holding. Midnight. I pushed for earlier. Midnight was the compromise. Carla's voice had an edge of controlled fury in it, the journalist's frustration at being managed. It's something, Elena. It's a public record once it's live, and it can't be unpublished. Not everything, but it's a start, Elena said. It's enough. It was enough because it changed the equation. The moment the prosecutor's story was public, the informant's calculation shifted. His name wasn't in the first story. Elena had made sure Carla understood, but his network was adjacent to it. The moment journalists started pulling on the prosecutor thread, the thread would eventually lead somewhere close to him. And he would know that. Which meant his leverage over Elena decreased the moment that story hit midnight. Not eliminated. Decreased, she'd take it. Thank you, she said to Carla. Don't thank me yet, Carla said. The full story is still on hold. I'm still fighting for it. I know, keep fighting. She ended the call. 7:49, 11 minutes. She watched the north entrance. At 7:58, Damien Rourke walked into the covered market. She'd known him for 10 years. She'd watched him walk into rooms hundreds of times. And still, even now, even here, even knowing everything she knew, there was a part of her that recognized the particular way he moved through a space not arrogant, not aggressive, but with a complete absence of uncertainty, as if the floor had been built for exactly the weight of his step. He was alone. She scanned behind him twice and watched the entrance for 30 seconds after he'd cleared it. No one followed him in. He found her without her signaling. Of course he did. He walked to the pillar and stopped 6 feet from her, close enough for conversation, far enough that anyone watching would see two people talking, not a confrontation. He looked at her for a long moment before he said anything. "You look exhausted," he said. "Don't," she said. He closed his mouth. "Talk," she said. "Tell me about the entry I didn't find." He looked at her in the way he sometimes had the assessment that she'd spent years learning to read. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and took out a folded piece of paper and held it out. She didn't take it. "Tell me what it says first." He lowered his hand slightly. "Your father's death," he said. The floor didn't move. She made sure of that she kept her feet flat and her weight even, and she kept her eyes on his face. "My father had a heart attack," she said. "He was 52. He'd been under financial stress for years." "Yes," Damien said. "And the financial stress had a source. His business failed." "His business was failed," Damien said, deliberately, "by a man named Garrett Hale, who was competing for the same regional contracts and who used fraudulent bid manipulation to undercut your father's company at 3 consecutive tender rounds. Your father's company didn't collapse from bad management. It was strangled over 18 months by someone who wanted the market share and had the means to take it." Elena's mouth was dry. "You're telling me my father was defrauded?" "Yes, systematically and with specific intent." Damien held out the paper again. "That entry in the ledger is Garrett Hale's file. The documentation of what he did to your father's company. The bid manipulation records. The paper trail of fraudulent submissions." A pause. "I've had it for 7 years." She took the paper, unfolded it. The handwriting was Damien's. Dates ran across 18 months. The same 18 months she'd watched her father age a decade and disappear into a stress-driven silence before the heart attack at the kitchen table of the house she'd grown up in. "Why?" she said. The word came out flat and without inflection, because any inflection would have broken something. "Garrett Hale runs a legitimate construction conglomerate now," Damien said. "Very clean, publicly respected. The city council contracts his company regularly." He paused. "2 of those council members are in your ledger photographs. Their relationship with Hale's company goes back to the same period your father's business was being destroyed. The fraud and the corruption are part of the same network." "Why did you have it?" she said. "Why did you keep it?" "Why didn't you?" "Because I intended to use it," he said. "Eventually. When it served a purpose." The flatness of that. Stared at the paper. "My father's death," she said slowly. "The evidence of why it happened. You filed it in a ledger under leverage." "Yes, you kept it for 7 years. Yes, and you never told me." The word "yes" formed on his face, and he didn't say it. He didn't look away from her either. He held her gaze with the particular steadiness of a man who had decided to take a thing full in the face and not flinch from it, which was his version of honesty, and she'd always known it, and it had never been enough. "Did you know about it when we met?" she said. "When Nolan brought me to that dinner." "Did you already know about Hale and my father?" A pause that was different from all his other pauses. "I had known for 3 months," he said. The market hummed around them. A vendor called something to a customer 20 feet away. Child laughed somewhere near the south wall. All of it completely indifferent to the thing that had just restructured itself inside Elena's chest. "You found out what was done to my father," she said, "and then you arranged to meet me." "Yes." "Was that—" She stopped. Started again. "Was that why? Because you'd found the file on what Hale did to my family and you felt—" "I don't know," he said. And that was the most honest thing he'd ever said to her. She thought not a clean answer, not a packaged explanation, just the raw admission that his own motivations had been tangled enough that he couldn't fully excavate them even now. "I saw the file. I learned about your family. I arranged to meet you. Whether those things are connected in the way you're asking, I genuinely don't know." "That's not good enough," she said. "I know it's not." "You managed my grief," she said, and her voice was shaking now, actually shaking, because this was the entry that page 31 hadn't contained, the thing underneath the thing, the betrayal behind the betrayal. "You had evidence that could have told me why my father died, and instead of giving it to me, you filed it in a ledger and married me, and kept it as—" "Elena?" She wasn't yelling. The shaking in her voice was the opposite of a yell. It was too controlled for that, barely held together. "What is the version of this, where what you just described is not the worst thing you've ever done to me?" He didn't answer. Because there wasn't an answer that worked, and he knew it, and she knew it, and they stood there in the middle of the covered market with that fact between them, solid and immovable. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it. Unknown number. The informant's number. 8:03 p.m. He was calling early. She looked at the phone and then at Damien. "He's calling me," she said. Something moved through Damien's expression, not surprise, more like a shift in the structure of the moment, a gear engaging. "Don't answer," he said. "Why? Because he's not calling to negotiate," Damien said. "Calling because something has changed, and he's trying to control your next move before you make it." His jaw was set. "What changed in the last hour?" "A story," Elena said. "Going live at midnight. Partial. Public records only." "His name isn't in it." "The prosecutor," Damien said immediately. "Yes." He found out. It wasn't a question. Someone in the editorial chain told him, or he's been monitoring Carla Webb's communications, which he has the means to do. Damien's eyes were moving now, the way they moved when he was running multiple calculations at once. He's not calling to offer you the deal again. He's calling to tell you the deal is off. "And then what?" "And then he moves to contain it," Damien said. "Story, the journalist, and you." The phone had stopped buzzing. Started again immediately. "You came here to tell me about Hale," Elena said. "Why tonight? Why this meeting?" "Because the situation has been moving faster than I planned for," he said. "And because you needed to know the full picture before." He stopped. "Before what?" "Before I make a decision that affects you," he said. "And I wanted it to be a decision you were part of." For once, she stared at him. "What decision?" He reached into his jacket again. Not a piece of paper this time. A phone his own, and on the screen was a message thread that he turned to face her. She read it. Her eyes moved through it once, then again. It was a message chain between Damien and the informant. It went back 14 months. It was not the chain of a handler running an asset. It was the chain of two men who had been in a cold war with each other, circling, each holding something over the other. The last message in the chain, sent by Damien 40 minutes ago, read, "She's at the meeting." "After tonight, the Hale documentation goes to federal channels with a full chain of custody that doesn't run through my organization. Your name goes with it. Cooperate with the journalist's story or deal with the alternative." Elena looked up from the phone. "You used the file on Hale," she said. "As leverage. Against him. The Hale network and his network have been intersecting for years," Damien said. "He's been protecting Hale's current contracts the same way he's been protecting everything else he's touched. The file on what Hale did to your father is also a file on what our informant has been doing for the last 6 years. You've been holding that over him," Elena said. "Yes. Yes. And you're using it now because I'm done managing it," he said. And something in his voice changed, dropped into a lower register that she associated with the moments in their marriage, when the performance of Damien Rourke fell away, and there was just a man standing there, tired, and without the usual architecture around him. "I'm done with the ledger. I'm done with the system. You were right that it was a system I used on everyone, including you, and He stopped. "I'm ending it." The phone in her hand was buzzing a third time. The informant. Calling back, she answered it. She didn't say anything. She just answered, and held the phone between herself and Damien so it was equidistant from both of them, and let the silence on the line speak for itself. Pause on the other end. The sound of a man recalibrating. "I know he's with you," the informant said. His voice had changed from the measured control of the afternoon call. Tighter. The sound of someone discovering their position is worse than they thought. "This doesn't change." "Midnight," Elena said. "The story goes live. Your name isn't in the first one. It'll be in the second one. How long that takes depends on how cooperative you are in the next 24 hours. She paused. "Or you can call Damien right now and have the conversation he just offered you. Your choice." Silence. "This isn't how this works," the informant said. "It is now," Elena said. She ended the call. Her hands were shaking. Not the restrained tremor of the past few hours, but an actual visible shaking, the body finally cashing in on everything it had been running through for 3 days. She gripped the phone and willed it to stop, and it didn't stop. Damien saw it. He took one step toward her. "Don't," she said. Stopped. "I'm not finished being angry at you," she said. "I'm not going to be finished for a very long time." "I know," he said, "the Hale file. You're giving it to federal channels." "Yes, with or without your agreement." But I wanted you to know it was happening. The rest of the ledger? A pause. That's what I wanted to discuss. It's not negotiable, she said. The ledger doesn't get managed into another system of control. It either goes to people who can use it to clean up what it documents, or it gets destroyed. Those are the only two options. That would dismantle a significant part of... I know what it dismantles, she said. That's the point. He looked at her. In the market light, he looked older than 44, or maybe just tired in the way she'd never quite seen on him, before the exhaustion of a man who'd been holding everything up for so long that setting it down was its own kind of collapse. There are people in that ledger, he said, who will come after you the moment they know it's in official hands. The deputy commissioner alone has enough reach to mine us. Then we move fast, she said. Carla's first story goes live at midnight. Her second, the full one, follows the ledger to whichever federal channel you identify as clean. She verifies and publishes before anyone in that ledger has time to organize a response. You've already thought this through, he said. I've had 72 hours and nothing to do but think, she said. Quiet. Around them, the market moved and breathed, indifferent and ordinary. A couple argued gently near the cheese vendor. An old man read something on his phone beside the bread stall. The normalcy of it was almost hallucinatory after 3 days, inside the particular reality she'd been living. The organization, Damien said. What's left of it after the ledger goes? It's not my problem, Elena said. That was never supposed to be my problem. That's something you spent 10 years making my problem without telling me. I know. Stop saying that, she said. Stop saying you know and then waiting for me to tell you it's okay. It's not okay. It won't be okay for a long time, and I need you to understand that, without needing me to manage that for you too. His jaw tightened. She saw it the involuntary response of a man who was not used to receiving something he couldn't immediately resolve. But he held it. He didn't reframe it or redirect it. He stood there and took it. That was new. In 10 years, that was new. There's one more thing, he said. What? Donovan has been talking to the Kerrigan family, he said. Since yesterday, Marcus told me. By now, Donovan has told the Kerrigans that the organization is destabilized, which means they're going to move on contested territory within the next 12 hours, which means the people Marcus still has loyal are going to respond, which means there's going to be a confrontation, Elena said. Unless I'm present to stop it, he said, which means I have about 4 hours to be somewhere I'm not. She looked at him steadily. You're telling me you have to go. I'm telling you I have to go handle the thing I create, he said. And I'm telling you that before I do, I need to know the baby. He said it carefully, like a word he'd been holding at a distance. Is it 11 weeks? She said. Yes. He absorbed that. Something moved across his face that was not calculation and not management, something older and less controlled than either of those things. I should have been told, he said. You should have been a lot of things, she said. And then, because she was not cruel even when she had every right to be, I was going to tell you. I was trying to find the right time, and then I found page 31, and there wasn't a right time anymore. He nodded. Once, the kind of nod that meant he'd heard the full weight of what she'd said and wasn't going to argue with any part of it. Where will you go? He asked. Somewhere you're not, she said. For now and after? She looked at him for a long moment. At the face she'd woken up next to for a decade, that she'd watched in sleep and in anger and in the unguarded moments that marriages accumulate without anyone choosing them. At the man who had protected her and controlled her and loved her and filed her in a ledger and made her tea at midnight and built a trap around her escape and was standing here now in a covered market in a city she'd never been to before, telling her things he'd held back for 7 years because she'd finally made it impossible for him not to. After is a different conversation, she said. One we're not having tonight. She picked up her bag. Her hands had stopped shaking. The Hale file, she said. I want a copy for my own records. I'll send it. And the informant, I'll handle the informant, he said. You focus on the journalist. I don't need you to handle things for me, she said. I need you to handle the things that are yours to handle. There's a difference. He looked at her. Something settled in his expression, not peace, not resolution, but the very early beginning of something that might become those things in time if enough other things changed around them. Understood, he said. She walked toward the north exit. She was 7 steps away from him when he spoke. Elena stopped. She didn't turn around. I'm sorry, he said. Not for any specific thing I can name. For the system of it. For treating you the way I treat everything I want to keep safe. A pause. I confused those two things for a very long time. She stood with her back to him, and the north exit 30 feet ahead, and the rest of the night still needing to be navigated. I know you did, she said. She pushed through the exit into the cold street outside. Behind her, she heard him exhale the sound of a man releasing something he'd been holding for longer than one conversation. She didn't look back. She kept walking into the dark and the thin rain, and the midnight that was coming, carrying the first story that would start dismantling the world she'd spent a decade living inside of. She was terrified. She was also, underneath the terror, something she hadn't let herself feel clearly until this exact moment. She was ready. This is a work of fiction created entirely for entertainment purposes. All characters, organizations, and events are imaginary. The story went live at 12:04 in the morning. Elta was sitting in a $20 a night room above a diner when it happened, the kind of room that had a window unit that made noise regardless of whether it was running, and a bedspread in a pattern that had probably been. Chosen specifically because it wouldn't show stains. She had the new phone propped against her bag on the small table, and she was drinking water from a plastic cup because she hadn't eaten since the granola bar at Ruth's, and her stomach had moved past hunger into something more abstract, kind of hollow steadiness that she recognized from the worst days of her early 20s. Carla sent her a link at 12:04. 2 words above it, it's up. Elena clicked through and read the story 3 times. It was clean and careful and devastating, in the way that factual journalism could be devastating. No drama, no editorializing. Just the paper trail laid out, in order with each document cited and each verification noted. The prosecutor's name was there, the case number, the timeline of the investigation, and the timeline of its collapse. The gap between what the evidence had shown and what the official closure filing had claimed. It was enough. Not everything, but enough. She set the phone down and sat with her hands flat on the table and let herself feel the enormity of it for exactly 1 minute. Not celebration, not relief, just the recognition that a thing she had set in motion had actually happened. The world had changed shape by 12:04 a.m. in a way it could not unchange. And she picked up the phone and called Carla. "It's clean," Elena said. "It's already getting traffic," Carla said. Her voice had the particular tightness of someone in the middle of a professional crisis that was also a professional triumph. 2 other outlets have reached out in the last 10 minutes asking about sourcing. The second story, Elena said, the full ledger. "I'm ready when you tell me the chain of custody is established." "Give me until morning," Elena said. She ended the call and lay down on the bedspread without taking her shoes off, and stared at the ceiling, and listened to the window unit make its noise, and thought about Damien somewhere in the city, handling the thing he'd created, and about Nolan driving home, shaken from a hotel lobby, and about the informant sitting in whatever room he sat, and calculating what his next move was, now that the first story was live, and his window for suppression had closed. She thought about her father sitting at the kitchen table, 52 years old. 18 months of watching something he'd built being quietly strangled by a man who wanted his market share. The financial stress that her mother had described as just bad luck, just the way business went sometimes, the way life went. Not luck, not the way things went. A man named Garrett Hale making specific choices in specific rooms for specific reasons, and the body of her father absorbing the cumulative weight of those choices until it gave out. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth and held it there for a moment. Then she reached down, unlaced her shoes, set them on the floor beside the bed, and closed her eyes. She slept 4 hours. When she woke up, it was still dark and the window unit had stopped, and the room was very quiet. She got up, washed her face, and called Damien. He answered on the 3rd ring, which meant he was awake, but had been doing something that required him to put distance between himself and the phone before picking up. She heard background sound, a room, people, something being resolved at volume, before he moved somewhere quieter. "The situation with Donovan," she said. "Handled," he said. The word was flat, and she decided not to ask what it meant in this specific context. "Kerrigan family? They got a message," he said. Hold. For long enough. A pause. "Story is live, I saw it." "Yes, you're safe?" "For tonight," she said. A silence between them that had a different quality from the silences of the past 4 days. not the silence of calculation or of secrets being managed. Something more tired than that. Something that had run out of the energy required for anything other than honesty. The federal contact, she said. The clean channel for the ledger. I sent the information to a number Carla Webb will recognize, he said. Contact inside the DOJ's public integrity section who has been wanting a case against the network for 3 years and doesn't have Rourke organization connections. He paused. Former Rourke organization connections. I want to be accurate. Are they expecting the full ledger? They're expecting documentation. I told them a source would be in contact through the journalist. I didn't specify what the documentation contained. Another pause. I thought you should control that conversation. Elena sat on the edge of the bed in the dark room. You're doing this, she said. You're actually doing it. Yes. The ledger goes into federal hands. It takes your organization apart. What's left of it, he said. Donovan accelerated that process considerably. And you? What about me? What happens to you when the ledger goes to the DOJ? The pause this time was the longest of the conversation. That depends on what the DOJ decides to do with it, he said, and on a number of other factors that I've been working on for longer than 3 days. Are you going to prison? She said directly, without softening it. I don't know, he said, and she believed him, which was a strange thing to believe that Damian Rourke, who had planned everything, had reached a point where he genuinely didn't know the answer to a question about his own future. The baby, she said. Yes, whatever happens to you, the baby needs to know the truth. About all of it, when they're old enough. She kept her voice steady. Not your version, not mine, the actual truth. Yes, he said. Not a negotiation. Okay, she said. Elena. The way he said her name had changed from the way he'd said it in the market. Quieter, less architecture around it. The Hale file. I sent it to your number an hour ago. She checked. It was there a secure document link, pages of records, the bid manipulation documented across 18 months, the name Garrett Hale on every page. Thank you, she said. She said it the way you said it when you meant the specific thing and not the general shape of gratitude. When you meant, I needed this, and you gave it to me. And that matters even though everything else is also true. Good night, Elena, he said. Good night, she said. She ended the call and sat in the dark for a while, with the document link open on her phone, not reading it, just looking at the first page. Her father's company name at the top of a record that had existed for 7 years in a ledger, in a desk drawer that she'd never been invited to open. She was going to read all of it, just not tonight. Tonight she put the phone face down on the bedside table, lay back down, pulled the bedspread up, and let herself rest. The second story broke 9 days later. Carla worked fast once the DOJ contact confirmed receipt of the full documentation. The federal inquiry opened quietly, the kind of opening that was announced only in the dry language of official filings that most people would never read, but Carla's story ran alongside it, and that story was not dry. It was the full account, the ledger, the network, the prosecutor, the council members, the deputy commissioner, the informant's 6 years of protection, and the Garrett Hale connection laid out in full, including what it had done to a small construction company and the man who'd owned it. Her father's name was in the second story. Elena had approved it. It had taken her 2 days to decide. Sitting in the quiet of a rented room in a city she was beginning to learn, and when she made the decision, she made it by thinking about what her father would have wanted, not the fragile, defeated version of him in the last 2 years of his life, but the earlier one, the one who'd believed that how you did a thing mattered as much as whether you did it. He would have wanted the truth on record. So she put it there. The informant was suspended pending investigation within 48 hours of the second story running. His name moved through news cycles for several days before other stories consumed the space. Elena followed it with a detached precision, not satisfaction, not relief, just the tracking of a consequence that had been set in motion and was now moving through the world at its own pace. Garrett Hale's company lost 2 city contracts in the week following publication. His attorneys issued a statement. Elena read it once, understood it was the beginning of a long legal process she would be tangentially involved in, and filed it in a folder she labeled simply with her father's name. Nolan called her the morning the second story ran. He'd read it the night before, he said. He'd sat up until 3 in the morning reading it. You put Dad in it, he said. Yes, a long silence. I should have told you, he said. 3 years ago, when I figured out some of it. I should have told you. Yeah, she said. You should have. I'm sorry, Elena. I know you are. She sat at the small table in the rented room with her coffee going cold in front of her. Nolan, you need to talk to someone. Not me. A therapist, a lawyer, both. The story is going to connect back to you eventually, not criminally. But journalists are going to have questions about the Rourke connection and about the dinner where things started. You need to be prepared for that. I know. And you need to stop letting people pay off your problems, she said. Not cruelly. The way you said a true thing to someone you loved without decorating it or softening it into something useless. Because the next person who does it will want something too, and the price keeps going up. He was quiet for a moment. Yeah, he said finally. I love you, she said. I love you too. Call a lawyer today. Today, he agreed. She hung up and finished the cold coffee and looked out the window at the street below, where a woman was walking a dog that kept stopping to investigate every crack in the sidewalk with total commitment. Elena watched them for a while. The woman was patient about it. She let the dog take its time. The months moved differently than she expected. She'd anticipated a period of rawness that would stay acute, the constant low-level crisis management she'd been running for 3 days extended somehow into the quieter version of recovery. What she found instead was something more complicated and less dramatic, a gradual settling, like sediment after turbulent water, into something clearer than what had been there before, but not necessarily more comfortable. Clarity was not the same as ease. She'd known that intellectually. She understood it now in her body. She found an apartment in a mid-sized city 3 hours from the Blackwood estate, far enough that she wouldn't encounter the geography of her old life accidentally, close enough that she could manage the legal and financial processes that came with separating a decade-long marriage from a criminal investigation. She hired an attorney who specialized in both family law and organized crime asset cases, a woman of 55 named Margaret, who had the blunt efficiency of someone who'd seen every version of this situation and had stopped being surprised by any of it. Your exposure is limited, Margaret told her at their first meeting. You weren't a knowing participant in the organization's activities. The documentation you provided is corroborated independently. You're in a good position relative to where people in your situation usually end up. That's a low bar, Elena said. Yes, Margaret agreed without apology. But it's the accurate one. Take the good position. She took it. The prenatal appointments were in a practice 20 minutes from the apartment, a clinic that was ordinary in every way she needed it to be, ordinary competent doctors, a waiting room with slightly outdated magazines, no one who recognized her name or looked at her with the particular expression she'd started to dread in the weeks after the stories ran. At 18 weeks, she learned she was having a girl. She sat in the parking lot of the clinic for 20 minutes after that appointment, not because she was upset, but because she needed to be completely still for a moment and let the fact of it land. A girl, a person already specific and particular, already taking up space in the world, with a certainty that had nothing to do with anyone's choices but her own. She called Dara. A girl, she said when Dara picked up. Pause on Dara's end, and then a sound Elena had never heard from her before, a short, warm laugh, unguarded and real. Good, Dara said. She's going to be difficult and excellent. She's going to have a complicated origin story, Elena said. Most of the best people do, Dara said. Elena wiped the back of her hand across her eyes, which had gone wet without her full authorization. I want to donate to the network properly, she said. Not cash through a trust, actually, with my name on it. Pause. That's a significant change in approach. I know. I'm done with the approach of not putting my name on things. She looked at the clinic building through the windshield, at the ordinary glass doors, and the ordinary people moving through them. I have resources that are going to be mine once the asset separation is finalized. I want some of them to go somewhere that matters. Then we'll set it up, Dara said simply. Damien's cooperation with the federal inquiry was conditional and partial and negotiated through 3 separate attorneys over 4 months. Elena knew the broad outlines because Margaret kept her informed in the way that a client needed to be informed, not everything, but enough. He was not charged. That was the outcome that Margaret delivered to her on a Tuesday morning, in a tone that suggested she'd expected something less clean than that. The cooperation had been significant enough, the material provided substantial enough. and the federal interest in the larger network extensive enough that his personal criminal exposure had been traded against the organizational intelligence he could provide. He would not run an organization again. That was a condition of the agreement. Permanent, documented, and monitored in ways Elena understood were real, because Damien was smart enough to know that the alternative was worse. He sold the Blackwood estate. She didn't ask what he did with the money. That was no longer her business. She had her own accounts, her own attorney, her own apartment with a second bedroom. She was painting a pale yellow on weekends, doing it herself because she wanted to be the person who would be painted her daughter's room. She'd gotten paint on her forearm the first weekend, a streak of yellow from wrist to elbow where the roller had caught wrong, and she'd stood in the middle of the room looking at it and laughed. Actually laughed. The kind that surprised her coming out, at the absolute mundane reality of being a person in the middle of an ordinary Saturday with paint on her arm and nothing more pressing happening anywhere in her life. She'd taken a photo of her arm. She hadn't sent it to anyone. She'd just looked at it and thought, this is what after looks like. The envelope arrived on a Wednesday in March. She was 7 months along by then, visibly and undeniably pregnant, and she had developed the habit of collecting her mail in the morning before her walk. Because the walk was the part of the day that was most entirely hers, 30 minutes in the neighborhood, at her own pace, thinking about nothing mandatory. The envelope was plain, no return address, postmarked from a city she didn't recognize somewhere mid-country, neutral. Her name on the front in handwriting she knew. She stood in the lobby of her building for a moment, holding it. Then she took it upstairs, set it on the kitchen table, made coffee, and sat down before she opened it. Inside was a single page, not a letter, not an explanation. The last page of the ledger, she recognized the paper, the weight of it, the texture that came from being handled over years. The final page, which had been blank when she'd photographed the preceding pages. It wasn't blank now. At the top of the page was her name, Elena Voss Rourke. Beneath it, crossed out in a single clean line, so that the name was still legible under the mark, but unmistakably struck through. Below the crossed-out name in his handwriting, 4 words. This time, you choose. She sat at the kitchen table for a long time with the page in front of her. She thought about page 31 and about the night she'd found it, standing in the study with rain on the windows, the moment when the architecture of her life had become visible to her for the first time, and she'd understood that visible and chosen were not the same thing. She thought about her father. About the 18 months she hadn't known about and now knew and had put on the public record, so that the knowing was no longer just hers to carry. She thought about the baby, her daughter, shifting in the particular way she shifted in the afternoons, a rolling pressure that Elena had learned to recognize as distinct from all other sensations, entirely its own. She folded the page along its original crease. She put it back in the envelope. She held the envelope in both hands for a moment. Then she got up, went to the second bedroom, the one with the yellow walls that still smelled faintly of paint, and put the envelope in the box where she kept documents she needed to keep, but hoped she would eventually not need to look at very often. Birth certificate, lease the Hale file, the pages from Margaret about the asset separation. Evidence of her life as it had been, not the life she was building, the one that had already happened. She closed the box, went back to the kitchen, picked up her coffee, which had gone lukewarm, and drank it, standing at the window looking out at the street where the morning was fully underway, people moving to work, a delivery truck idling at the corner, 2 kids on bikes moving fast past the stopped truck without looking, the way kids did, as if the world was required to accommodate their momentum. She put her free hand on her stomach. Her daughter moved, the rolling pressure, deliberate and present. Okay, Elena said quietly, to both of them. She rinsed her cup, picked up her bag, and went out for her walk. The street was cool and bright and entirely ordinary, the kind of morning that existed, without requiring anything from her. No management, no calculation, no reading of silences for what they concealed. She walked at her own pace, the pace of a woman in her 3rd trimester, who had learned not to hurry things that didn't need hurrying. At the corner she turned left instead of her usual right, for no reason except that the light was there and the day was there, and she felt like seeing what was in the direction she hadn't gone before. The street opened into a small square with benches and a tree that was just beginning to show the first pale suggestion of spring leaves, not quite green yet, caught between what it had been and what it was becoming. She sat on a bench in the thin morning light and breathed in the cold air and let the day be what it was. She was 34 years old, 7 months pregnant, and alive in every specific, unglamorous, irreducible sense of that word. She was not someone's wife. She was not the keeper of someone else's ledger or the subject of someone else's entry. She was not running and she was not hiding, and she was not managing the version of herself that fit inside a life built around someone else's needs. She was Elena, first name only, the way she'd introduced herself before all of it began. The tree above the bench moved in a small wind, the not yet green leaves catching light. She sat there for a while, just sat, and when she was ready, she got up and walked forward into the morning, into the life she was choosing, one deliberate step at a time. This is a work of fiction created entirely for entertainment purposes. All characters, organizations, and events are imaginary. Elena stayed on the bench longer than she'd planned. That was new too, the ability to let time move without accounting for it. For 10 years, her mornings had been structured around Damien's schedule, which meant her internal clock had been calibrated to someone else's rhythm for so long that she'd stopped noticing it as an imposition. It had just become the shape of a day. You woke when he woke or earlier to have things prepared. You moved through the hours at a pace determined by what was needed, by who was coming, by what event or meeting or obligation was anchored to which hour. Now she sat on a bench in a small square and watched a pigeon investigate a crack in the pavement with the absolute commitment that pigeons brought to everything, and nobody needed her anywhere. And the morning went at whatever pace the morning wanted. She thought about her mother. It arrived the way things arrived now, not as a crisis requiring management, but as something that surfaced naturally and wanted attention. Her mother was 61 and lived in the house Elena had grown up, in 40 minutes north of the city where Elena had settled. They'd spoken twice in the months since the stories ran. Both conversations had been careful in the way. Conversations were careful when two people were navigating a seismic shift in the ground between them without a map. Her mother has read the second story. She'd called Elena the morning it was published, and had said almost nothing for the first 2 minutes of the call. Elena had listened to her breathe on the other end of the line, and had not tried to fill the silence with researches, which was her old habit, the habit of a daughter who had spent her adult life managing her mother's fragility. Your father, her mother, had finally said. I know, Elena said. He wasn't just unlucky, no he wasn't. Another long silence. Then, quietly, I always thought it was my fault somehow. That I'd added too much pressure, that if I'd been less, she stopped. I spent 12 years thinking that. Elena had pressed her hand flat against the wall of whatever room she'd been in when the call came. It wasn't you, she said. It was Garrett Hale. It's documented. It happened the way the story says it happened. I know. A pause. I read it 3 times. I know you did. Elena. Her mother's voice had shifted some quality in it that Elena couldn't immediately name, and then recognized. It was the sound of her mother being fully present without the buffer of performed fragility. Unmediated. The person her mother had been before everything. Are you all right? Not the situation, you. Are you all right? Elena had thought about that for a moment before answering. I'm getting there, she said. I'm actually getting there. Pigeon in the square gave up on the crack in the pavement and moved to a more promising location near the base of a bench across the way. Elena watched it and thought, she needed to visit her mother. Not a managed visit with an agenda and a timeline. Just to go and sit in the kitchen of the house she'd grown up in and drink whatever her mother put in front of her and let the afternoon go at the pace it went. She would do that this weekend, she decided. She would take the train north and not tell her mother she was coming and knock on the door and see what happened. She stood up from the bench, her body doing the thing it did. Now when she stood, the small readjustment of weight, the recalibration of balance around the changed center of gravity that she was still, at 7 months, not entirely used to. She put her hand on her stomach briefly, the automatic gesture, and her daughter moved in response. The rolling pressure that Elena had begun to think of as confirmation, still here, still becoming. I know, Elena said, let's go. She walked home. Margaret called that afternoon with the final figures on the asset separation. Elena sat at the kitchen table with a notepad and wrote down numbers and asked 3 questions and wrote down the answers, and when the call ended, she sat for a moment looking at what she'd written. It was enough. more than enough. Her portion of the jointly held assets, the ones that were cleanly hers, untouched by the organizational money that had been separated out in the federal process, was enough for her to not have to work for a year, 2 years, if she was careful. Enough to fund the donation to Dara's network she'd talked about. Enough to pay cash for the kind of apartment that had a second bedroom with enough space for a child to grow without feeling contained. She was not naive about where the money had originally come from. She'd sat with that specific discomfort for a long time and had arrived at a position she could live with. Her portion was the portion that predated the marriage, her own inheritance modest, from her father's estate, which had included life insurance, plus the property settlements and liquid assets that Margaret had established, were wholly separate from the organization's revenue. She had not profited from Damien's criminal empire. Simply, over 10 years, accumulated the ordinary financial evidence of a shared domestic life, a joint account, a property interest, the mundane accumulation of two people living together over a decade. She took what was hers, nothing more. She transferred the donation to Dara's network that afternoon, set it up properly, with Margaret's help, through a foundation structure that meant it would keep operating without requiring Elena's ongoing management. She named the foundation after her father his full name, plain on the registration documents. Not as a monument, just as a fact. This came from something he lost, and it's going toward something that matters. She closed her laptop when it was done and went to make dinner, the actual act of cooking, which she'd rediscovered in the past months as something she did for herself rather than as a performance of domestic competence for an audience. She made pasta because she wanted pasta, with too much garlic because she liked too much garlic, and she ate it at the kitchen table, reading a novel she'd been working through slowly, because she was allowing herself to read slowly now, without guilt. Without the sense that attention spent on her own enjoyment was attention borrowed from something more important. The novel was about a woman in a lighthouse. Elena wasn't sure yet if it was good. She kept reading it anyway. She went to her mother's house on Saturday. She took the 9:15 train and arrived just before 11, walked the 6 blocks from the station the way she'd walked them as a teenager, past the hardware store and the bakery that had changed ownership 3 times since she was young but had somehow always remained a bakery, and turned onto the street, where the house sat behind its low fence, with the same slightly overgrown front garden it had always had, because her mother found gardening more appealing in theory than in practice. She knocked. Her mother opened the door and looked at her for a full 3 seconds before saying anything. Elena stood on the step with her coat and her bag and her 7-month stomach and met her mother's eyes and waited. "You should have called," her mother said. "I know," Elena said. "Are you going to let me in?" Her mother stepped back and opened the door wider. The house smelled the same. That was the thing about the houses you grew up in. The smell didn't change even when everything else did. Some sensation of the structure itself, and years of accumulated cooking, and the particular cleaning products a person used habitually. It hit Elena in the chest in the way familiar smells did, bypassing the thinking part of the brain and going somewhere older. Her mother made tea. Elena sat at the kitchen table, the same chairs, her father's chair still in its same position, though he'd been gone for 15 years, and put her hands around the mug and felt the warmth move through her palms. They talked for 3 hours, not about the stories or the ledger or Damien or the federal inquiry. About smaller things, the things that had been happening in the ordinary run of her mother's days. A neighbor who'd gotten a new dog that barked. A television program her mother had watched 3 episodes of before deciding it wasn't for her. The gutters that needed cleaning before spring rain started in earnest. Her mother talked about Elena's father twice, in the natural way, the way you mentioned, someone who'd been gone long enough that mentioning them wasn't an event, it was just part of conversation. He would have been delighted, her mother said at one point, gesturing at Elena's stomach. "I know," Elena said. He would have wanted to know everything about the birth plan and the hospital, and whether they'd done the safety inspections recently. He was extremely concerned about safety inspections when you were born. Elena laughed. It was the specific laugh of recognition, her father's meticulous, anxious love for the people he was responsible for, expressed through the proxy of infrastructure and logistics. "The baby's going to know about him," Elena said. "I want her to know who he was." Her mother looked at her across the table. "Her a girl," Elena said. 18 weeks, I found out." Her mother's face did something complicated, and then settled into something simple and clear, the way faces did, when emotion ran past the point of performance into the real thing underneath. She reached across the table and put her hand over Elena's. They sat like that for a while. "Stay for dinner," her mother said. "Yes," Elena said. Carla Webb called on a Tuesday 6 weeks before the due date. Elena was in the middle of assembling a flat-pack bookcase, the specific absurdity of which she was completely aware. A woman in her 8th month of pregnancy, cross-legged, on the floor of her second bedroom, with instructions that seemed to have been translated from a third language, and a bag of screws that contained 3 more screws than the instructions called. And she answered with paint-free hands this time. Just the slightly dusty hands of someone doing assembly work. "The Hale case," Carla said. "The civil suit. His attorneys made a settlement offer this morning." Elena set down the instruction sheet. "To whom?" "To your father's estate, technically. Which means to your mother as the surviving heir." A pause. "My contact at the courthouse says it's significant. I can't publish the number, but Elena, it's significant." Elena sat on the floor of the yellow room with the disassembled bookcase around her and absorbed this. Garrett Hale, in the end, had not been charged criminally. The documentation was strong, but the statute of limitations on the specific fraud charges had run out 12 years prior. But the civil liability had survived, and the attorneys her mother had retained at Elena's insistence, paid from Elena's own funds, had been building the case for 4 months. A settlement was not the same as a verdict. Elena knew that. A settlement was a man with enough money to make a problem go away writing a check, because the alternative was more expensive and more public. It was not justice in any clean or satisfying sense of that word. It was also something. It was Garrett Hale writing a number on a document and acknowledging, through the language of civil law, that what had happened to her father's company had been his doing and had a cost. "Tell your contact I said thank you," Elena said. "I'll pass it along." A pause. "How are you?" "Assembling a bookcase," Elena said. A short laugh from Carla. "By yourself now? It seemed manageable when I started." "Is it manageable?" Elena looked at the pieces around her, the 2 panels she'd successfully connected, the third that was clearly going to require a different approach than the instructions indicated. "It's a process," she said. "That's a diplomatic answer. I'm practicing." After the call, she finished the bookcase. It took another hour and required one creative modification to the methodology that the instructions had not anticipated, but that resulted in a structurally sound piece of furniture. She put it against the wall and stood back and looked at it. It wasn't perfect. One of the shelves had a slight lean to the left that she hadn't fully corrected before the backing panel locked everything in place. It would hold books fine. It would hold everything she planned to put on it. The lean was something she'd see every time she looked at it, and she found, standing there in the yellow room, that she didn't mind. The imperfect thing she'd built herself. She could live with that. Her daughter was born on a Thursday morning in May, at 6:42 a.m., after a labor that was long and difficult in ways Elena hadn't been able to fully prepare, for no matter how much she'd read about it, the specific, irreducible physicality of it, the way it demanded everything she had and didn't negotiate, and wasn't interested in her plans or her capacity for endurance. She got through it the way she'd gotten through the past year, one thing at a time, without looking too far ahead. Port of the midwife, whose name was Grace, and who had steady hands and a direct manner that Elena found in extremis deeply comforting. And then her daughter was there, in her arms, on her chest, small and specific, and making a sound that Elena would never be able to accurately describe, not a cry exactly, more like an assertion, an announcement. "I am here. I have arrived. Take note." Elena pressed her lips to her daughter's forehead and held her and breathed. She named her after her father's mother, a woman Elena had met only twice before she died, but who her father had described as the most practically fearless person he'd ever known. Someone who did things because they needed doing, and didn't spend a lot of time asking whether she was qualified. A good name for a girl who was going to need to know that about herself. The last communication from Damien came 3 months after the birth. Not a call, not a text. An envelope, the same plain kind as before, the same careful handwriting on the front. Inside was a document, legal, formal, prepared by his attorneys, and already signed by him. It was the formal acknowledgement of paternity and the attached agreement about his role going forward, present if invited, present on terms Elena established, with no claim to override or challenge those terms, regardless of circumstance. Not an absence, he was not removing himself, but a presence made conditional entirely on Elena's consent. On the bottom of the document, below his signature, he'd written 4 words in the same hand as before. Not the ledger words this time. Different ones. She should know me. Elena read it twice. She sat in the kitchen with her daughter asleep in the bassinet in the next room, and the morning light coming through the window, at the angle it came through at 9 a.m. And she thought about what it would mean for her daughter to know her father, and what it would mean not to, and what kind of person she was trying to be when she made decisions like this. She was not going to make it easy. She was not going to pretend the past year hadn't happened, or that the man who had structured her life around control had fully become someone different because he'd cooperated with a federal inquiry and sold an estate and sent her an envelope with 4 words in it. She was also not going to make her daughter carry the weight of her own unresolved grief about a marriage. That was Elena's weight. Her daughter was 4 months old, and already specific and fierce in hers, and she deserved to come to her own understanding of her father, with enough information and enough time to make it actually hers. Elena picked up a pen. On the bottom of the document below her own signature line, she wrote, slowly, on her terms eventually, starting with yours. She signed it. She put it back in the envelope. She wrote Damien's attorney's address on the front from memory, and set it beside the door to mail in the morning. Then she went to the bassinet and looked at her daughter, who was asleep with one fist near her cheek and the expression of complete self-possession that very young babies had, as if sleep were something they were doing on purpose and with authority. We're going to figure it out, Elena said quietly. All of it. We have time. Her daughter slept on, untroubled, already fluent in a language of certainty that Elena was still learning. She went to the window. The street below was doing what it did in the late morning ordinary and indifferent and entirely unrelated to any of the things that had happened in the past 18 months. A man walked a dog. 2 teenagers stood outside the corner store talking without looking at each other the way teenagers did. A delivery driver double-parked without apology and jogged toward a building entrance with a package. The world going on. The world always going on. Elena stood at the window in the apartment she'd chosen. In the city she'd chosen. In the morning she'd chosen to let go at its own pace, and she felt the particular, ordinary weight of her own life settling around her not as a cage, not as a structure someone else had built, but as the thing she was making, day by day, from the materials she actually had. Perfect. The shelf still leaned slightly left. There were things she hadn't resolved, and things she might never fully resolve, and a conversation with Damien that wasn't finished, and probably never would be in any clean sense of the word finished. But it was hers. Every decision in it was. She turned from the window when she heard her daughter stir a small sound that preceded waking, the gathering of breath before the assertion. Elena crossed the room, picked her up before the cry fully formed, held her close. "I've got you," she said simply, as a fact and a promise both. Her daughter looked up at her with the unfocused intensity of a 4-month-old encountering the world, and Elena looked back, and neither of them looked away. This is a work of fiction created entirely for entertainment purposes. All characters, organizations, and events are imaginary.